said the Chinese spies run government. Oh, they do already.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, excellent. Very good. Julia Hartley-Brewer coming up at the penultimate Julia Hartley-Brewer show of the year. You don't want to miss that. And then tomorrow as well. I'll be back tomorrow morning from 6. I'm going to remove this alcohol from the studio. I don't think I've ever had a drink this early in the morning and not been on holiday, to be honest. So I'm going to go and drink the rest of it and pretend to come back to work until tomorrow. I'll see you at 6 o'clock. Enjoy.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
And a very, very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Hopefully sound a little bit better than yesterday. Seem to be recovering from whatever this lurg is that's doing the rounds across, as far as I can tell, the whole of the country. I hope you're surviving as well and will be in good spirits, ready for the real Christmas. Although, judging by the smell in the studio from all the booze, it's been quite a good Christmas already with Mike and his wine and port tasting. Anyway, lots to talk about today. Some of it, I'm afraid, rather more serious than where Prince Andrew does or does not spend Christmas. But whether you are watching on YouTube, on your connected device, listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, it is great to have your company. Now, coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking about Keir Starmer developing closer ties with China. Oh, he's all in favour of that. He was the first Prime Minister in years to meet with Xi Jinping at the Brazil summit recently, despite, though, Beijing having, we're told, thousands of agents who could be doing exactly the same as the alleged spy Yang Tengbo, who was unmasked yesterday. This is H6, who had befriended Prince Andrew. After the revelation, it has been confirmed that the Duke of York will not, along with his ex-wife Fergie, be joining the rest of the royal family for the traditional Christmas gathering in Sandringham. But of course, it's rather more important than that, isn't it, this issue? It's not about who or who is not friends with Prince Andrew and where he spends Christmas. It's about Chinese spies reaching the heart of British government. How much influence have they got, and how dangerous is that? And that's what I want to hear from you about today, because after the Chinese spying row, what should Britain do about the threat from China is my question. You may say, nothing. We're doing the same. We must be spying in China. If we're not, why aren't we? In which case, should we do anything at all? Do you think this is a big threat? What should Britain do, if anything, about the threat from China? Should we be breaking off ties? Should we be moving away from economic ties? Should we be trying to get closer to China? Tell me what to do. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk and then your message to 87222. You can also send us a message on X at Talk TV. Calls, of course, are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. We're also going to be talking about these Labour moves, which are just, you know it's coming. These moves to tie us closer in with the European Union. Of course, Keir Starmer never wanted us to leave, didn't actually believe that the democratic vote in 2016 should have been upheld. He campaigned against that for 3 long years, did he not? But Downing Street has refused to rule out now returning Britain to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, as an EU body. It's for the first time since Brexit. That could be part of the price of the reset of relations with the EU bloc. Is that a price you're willing to pay? Certainly not one I'm willing to pay. Also going to be staying on the European side of the channel. Germany's coalition government has collapsed. This is after Chancellor Olaf Scholz lost a vote of confidence yesterday. The country's facing more elections in February, so that means the EU's 2 biggest countries are in both political and economic turmoil right now, Germany and France. But yeah, let's try and get closer with the EU, because they're doing so well, aren't they? We're going to be talking about all of that here at Talk, the home of common sense. Joining me for all that chat, I'm delighted to say, regularly on a Tuesday, it's Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. A very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. Question, as we're putting to our audience. What should Britain do about the threat from China after this spy, H6 as he was known as, expelled from the country last year, banned from returning? He was exposed apparently at his own request. The court dropped the ruling, even though it was his request, that he wasn't named here, as Yang Tengbo, a guy who was absolutely at the heart of pretty much everything Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, was doing to try and raise money for himself. Who are we kidding? Even the prince, the pitch at the palace where he takes 2% of any deals that are done. This ain't philanthropy, folks. This is Prince Andrew filling his boots. But what should we do about the spying?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's clear that whatever process is supposed to be in place to keep tabs on people who, whilst maybe not declaring that they are serving the interests of a foreign government...
Do people do that when they arrive in the country? Hello, I'm serving the interests of the Chinese, a hostile government. Would they be? Is that something you fill out on a form?
Well, that's the nature of these things, because when the previous government passed legislation to try and sort of tighten up the rules around kind of people registering when they are essentially representatives, it's quite clear that if someone's only operating on an entirely legitimate basis, those people will obviously come forward. Everyone else, the whole point is that they go undetected. So the question is, how do you detect those people? How do you make sure that there isn't so many people that they can so readily exploit? And are there quick and clear-cut mechanisms to deal with these people, to keep them out of the country when they are rumbled? This gentleman had been essentially hanging around quite high-level political and also royal circles for a very long time.
20 years.
Photos of him with various former prime ministers.
Prime ministers, various royals. Yeah.
Much of this does seem to sort of coincide with that supposed golden age of China relations heralded under David Cameron. So all of that is really important to tackle on a kind of fundamental level, because it doesn't matter if it's China or any other hostile to slightly more complicated relationship as we do with China, the sort of nation that you're talking about. You can't have a situation where you're lackadaisical or have terrible measures in place to deal with people when they try to get it.
The difficult thing is, it's very different from, say, dealing with Russia. For a start, huge amounts of trade goes on with China, huge amount of investment from Chinese companies. By the way, they make money when they do that. Ain't that the goodness of their heart? But also, crucially, we're not, engaged in any sort of warfare with China at the current time, but they are engaged in non-stop cyber attacks on us, non-stop cyber espionage, stealing from academic, scientific developments and technological developments from companies, from academia, spying on our political system, our economic system. They are a hostile nation state run by a murderous tyrant. I do think people need to stop treating China as if it's a normal country. It's a danger, it's a threat to our way of life. In the same way we talk about, Islamic State. Yes, they want us all to die. They think that we should all be converted to live under their rules or we die. Those are the two options. China pretty much wants the same thing. Different kind of ruling, different kind of world it would be, but that's what they want. They are a threat to our way of life, to our values, to the West, to our freedoms. And anyone who doesn't get that, frankly, ain't paying enough attention, in my view. But we're much more clear-cut about the Russian threat. Oh, you roll tanks into Ukraine. OK, right, you get sanctioned. Russians can't come to this country freely. We're not buying their oil. I mean, we just buy it once it's sold to India, then we buy it from India. Crazy. That needs to stop. But China, we're just sort of, on our knees, sort of begging them, oh, please, some more money. I worry that they are already, they've taken over academia, the amount of money that they throw. We've got the same thing with Middle Eastern oil states as well. They throw money at sport and whitewash themselves. The Chinese doing the same thing. They've done it across South America, Africa, the Caribbean. They just throw a load of money, a load of investment, and then they sort of call in debts, and then they use this as a way of having a hold over people. I am very, very worried that a huge part of our establishment in this country is bought and paid for by the Chinese. They don't realise it. I'm not saying they're having secret clandestine meetings on benches in St James's Park and go, yes, I'm going to betray my country. I think there is so much money being peddled about that they don't even realise it.
Well, I think the thing about China is the fact that whilst it might not be engaged in kind of hot war with the West, I don't think it's necessarily a case that this is a sort of product of us being overwhelmed by this rising global hegemony. Yeah. It's got certain interests and it's keen to pursue them. And I think it's been very effective at exploiting Western weaknesses, even a willingness to, rather than say, to constantly kind of outsource building your infrastructure to a foreign country. That's always going to put you in a perilous position, particularly when it's dictatorship.
Just sell off everything.
And similarly, the questions of the amount of influence it's managed to exert across the world, which has left Western powers feeling slightly less, more diminished influence in certain parts of the world. That's because they did what many Western countries didn't do, is that they go to places in Africa and say, rather than give you lectures and build you compost toilets, we're going to build you roads and hospitals. So there are lessons to be learned from this. And it's quite clear that, of course, you need to deal with China with no illusions. People will have to deal with China. It is the rising superpower. But at the same time, having a look in the mirror and trying to recognise what advantages they have taken is often because of our own missteps and weaknesses. Yes,
it's our own failures, absolutely. Well, Keir Starmer has been accused of sort of, basically getting too close to China, and particularly there are concerns over this big new super Chinese embassy near the Tower of London, where basically they want to have this epic, huge big block, which would be effectively Chinese territory inside the heart of London, in the heart of the city of London. And it's been rejected by the local council. Keir Starmer, after a conversation with Xi Jinping, calls it in. Now, calls it in means basically the government's going to make the decision. Why would you need to do that unless you were going to override it? We're already seeing that power behind the scenes, these conversations behind the scenes happening that could have an impact. There's a big concern about the Chinese being able to do that. But he's basically been told, he should sort of toughen his stance on China. He's defended fostering closer ties. He's admitted he was concerned about the challenge posed by China, but doubled down on his policy, he says, of engagement and cooperating with the state. There is this really big thing about not offending the Chinese. Well, you know what, calling them out for imprisoning 1 million Uyghur people. All these people who are so concerned about the Palestinian people, they all care about Muslims in Gaza. Yeah, Muslims in China, not so much.
And this particular government, because it has doubled down on the net zero agenda, which, as everyone knows, because of what a big player China has become in that whole kind of renewable energy, electric cars sort of pipeline, if you like, that there is an even greater incentive for them to be slightly less forthcoming with those criticisms than even the previous government, which also tried to maintain a kind of fudge position rather than take any particular stand on a lot of these issues.
Absolutely. In terms of other international news, what do you make of this bomb that's killed a Russian general, Igor Kirillov? He's basically in charge of nuclear protection, nuclear defence in Moscow. He's died the day after he was charged with basically crimes involving using weaponry in Ukraine. He looks exactly, by the way, like if you're going to go, give me a picture of a Russian general. Yep. That's him, that's Igor. Obviously, the Ukrainians will find the fingers pointed at them. Look, they're at war with Russia, as far as I'm concerned. Military figures always justifiable, but there's no doubt at all. As I wanted when I voted for Brexit in 2016 was to make sure that justice happened closer to home. I don't feel the need for any court to be higher than the highest court in my own land. where judges are appointed in a system. I mean, not entirely sure I'm very happy with the way judges are appointed, but at least it's not some random judge appointed by, I don't know, someone in Poland. But number 10 has refused to rule out accepting the European Court of Justice's jurisdiction in some specific areas as part of a improved relationship with Brussels, as part of the reset. Basically turning us to the jurisdiction of the court for the first time since Brexit could be a key part of resetting our relationship. Now, that has got to be a red line, hasn't it? Because a key part of us voting for Brexit meant, you're coming out of the customs union, you're coming out of the European Court of Justice, you're coming out of freedom of movement, and I mean that's literally the whole point, isn't it?
Absolutely, and you would think that this government had more sense than to try and reopen these questions.
Really? Have you seen this government for the last 5 months?
The way they're trying to do it is also incredibly sneaky. So they have been essentially trying to, as what they would call kind of depoliticise Brexit, which is what they mean, try to reverse it, but very quietly behind the scenes, passing legislation that would give them powers to align us closer with EU rules, now reopening the question of European Court of Justice jurisdiction. This is obviously the direction of travel. And it's they're
a bit sodding brave about doing this, given where they are in the polls, given the mandate they don't have in terms of percentage of the electorate who voted for them. Yes, they've got the MPs, no doubt, it's a completely democratically elected government, but they don't have a mandate for this. This is just their own personal mission, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I mean, they went into the election just saying we need a few agreements around the edges, we need a veterinary agreement.
Of course we won't backtrack on Brexit.
We just need to polish what we've got as much as possible and then move on. And yet we all knew that wasn't going to be left at that, because this is what they believe in. Keir Starmer is a legalist. He believes in kind of these international, unaccountable institutions. He thinks that's the best way in which politics is done.
Well,
that's
can't
the
trust
one
the
through
voters.
line of what he has.
You can't trust the voters.
Absolutely.
They vote for things you don't agree with sometimes.
He's the quintessence of that kind of worldview, and I think it's natural that he's going to reopen all of these different questions.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Do get in touch on this. How would you feel about us being, we talked about it as well on the show yesterday, but this, Brexit being undermined by the back door, depoliticising it, i.e. Completely, as John says, undermining it, going back into the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. It's not a British court. I don't see why it has any jurisdiction over us. I mean, full stop, end of. We're not in the EU. Last time I looked, we might be by the end of this 5-year term of Labour government. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Is that a red line for you? Or do you think that Labour's got a mandate for that? Because they were very clear that, they've always thought that we should have closer ties with Europe. How close exactly? Do give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. That's 0344 499 1000 as well. Let's also talk about Nigel Farage, linked, of course, to Brexit, as always. He's criticised, quite rightly, two-tiered justice after the OnlyFans model tart. I mean, I'm sorry, you're not a model because you get your boobs out for random men online. That doesn't make you a model, darling. You're not on a catwalk, sweetheart. But this OnlyFans model, Victoria, I really don't like this woman. I can't express how much I don't like this woman. Victoria Thomas Bowen, she's the one who threw that banana milkshake out over him, didn't get a jail sentence. Now, should one necessarily get a jail sentence for that? That's the question mark. There's a lot of discretion that judges have. But bearing in mind that, this was an unprovoked attack, this was an attack on a politician. A lot of people are pointing out, and I think people are right to say, this is an attack on our democracy. You can't attack politicians going out and about campaigning in an election, because just in the same way the Southport riots, there was an argument, certainly the people who were actually involved in the riots, not the people sending tweets, but the people involved in the actual riots, you need to send a message. No, not going to happen. Okay. Why is that message, given that we've had 2 MPs stabbed to death, for God's sake, why is that not a message being sent out at this point, that you cannot throw stuff at political candidates?
There is a very real danger here that it becomes sort of open season, and also if it becomes a sense that it's open season on certain kinds of politicians. Because that's the other thing about this case. Because as you say, there's a debate that could be had about how harsh a punishment should be, what is the right measure, what is a kind of analogous case that we could look to and see what we can measure it against. But then, not least because the particular district judge in this case, Tan Ikram, has been previously accused. Accusations, I'm sure, that he would have firmly rebuff, of some level of political bias. He famously locked up a police officer for sharing racist, disgusting jokes on WhatsApp.
But he's private WhatsApp groups.
But he spared the famous paraglider girls, the supposedly pro-Palestine protesters who had the paraglider pro-Hamas stickers on their backs. He spared them jail.
Well, he said you crossed the line, but it would have been fair to say that emotions ran very high on this issue. Yes, they were celebrating people, terrorists, murderers and rapists coming into a music festival, murdering and butchering and raping people. And taking, but yeah, emotions ran very high. Yeah, so it was absolutely okay, apparently.
You can celebrate racism in public, just not in private. Seems to be the
exactly
the summary of what he's saying there. And it has led to questions about whether or not if he's willing to practice kind of two-tier justice in this case, would the same apply in this case? So
well, exactly. But also, he extraordinarily. I mean, you know, he didn't send to jail that time, but there definitely seems to be a. Put it this way, a political slant to his views. Sarah Jane Baker, a man who identifies as a trans woman, he was actually out on licence while serving a life sentence for attempted murder, kidnapping and torture. Lovely man. Last August, Ikram heard his case, in which Baker had told an audience of trans activists in London, if you see a TERF, punch them in the effing face. This judge ruled that was not criminal speech. So a private message, okay, even a racist, sexist, homophobic, horrible, nasty message sent in private in a WhatsApp group, that is unacceptable. But celebrating a massacre of Jews, talking about punching women, a man talking about punching women in the face, that's not hate speech. This man has some serious issues as far as I'm concerned, but he is fully and utterly on board with this whole sort of diversity, DEI culture, isn't he? I mean, which is where our judges are now. So if you think you're going to go to court to get a bit of quiet sanity, judges are no longer representing. You can't become a judge. He's the guys on the board of the judges who agree other judges. You can't become a judge unless you sign up to this madness. That's what's going on. Again, that ideology, critical race theory, trans ideology, I would say also anti-Semitism, because that is a crucial part of the DEI. It is part of it now. That is absolutely infected every part of our establishment, including our courts, which is a terrible thing. But there's no doubt at all. I mean, I can live with her not going to jail, but people writing tweets would go to jail. And that is where we've got two-tier justice. And you know perfectly well, if she had milkshaked, you know, a Labour candidate, there's no doubt at all in my mind that she would have gone to jail. But because it was Nigel Farage, he's fair game, which is that tells you everything about what's going on in our courts today.
And the longer it goes on, the longer it is going to feel like it is open season. That wasn't the only assault on him that took place during that election campaign. Also, people throwing bits of brick and so on. This is something which is going to continue. The more that there isn't clear-cut justice, but also clear-cut condemnation and not two-tier outrage, depending on which politician is being assaulted.
Absolutely. Tom Slater, thank you very much for that. Love to hear your reaction to that as well. Do give us a call on that, 0344 499 1000. As always, phone lines open for anything you want to talk about. But I do particularly want to hear about you on this Chinese spying row. And what should Britain do about the threat from China? Maybe you think there isn't a threat. It's not an issue. For goodness sake, we've got spies. I mean, if we don't have spies in China, frankly, I don't know what our Foreign Office is doing and what MI5, MI6, whoever it is that deals with this stuff is doing. But you know, is it a threat? Is it not a threat? What should we do about it? Do get in touch. And are you particularly concerned about where Prince Andrew is going to be spending Christmas this year? Do get in touch, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater is still with me. Let's get straight to your phone calls. And interestingly, I thought this was probably what happened. You want to talk about the Brexit betrayal yet again. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all the topics we're talking about. Nigel Farage and that we talked about on the show yesterday, and the two-tier justice in terms of sentencing for his attacker, but also the Chinese spying row. What should Britain do, if anything, about the threat from China? Just some breaking news about this is lawyer Christine Lee. Now, MI5 had said that Christine Lee had engaged in political interference and activities for a branch of the Chinese Communist Party. She has lost a legal challenge against the security services at the Investigatory Powers Tribunal. So I don't know what that it means for her, whether she is going to be ordered to leave the country or not. We'll try and get some details on that. Right now, though, let's go to the phone lines. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. It's in particular about the possibly returning to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice as part of the whole sort of Keir Starmer reset, as he calls it, with the EU, but basically, ending Brexit by the back door. Let's go to Andrew, who's in Hertfordshire. Hello, Andrew.
Good morning. I hope you're very well. Your voice seems a lot better today.
Yeah, yes, sorry about that. The last week it's been a bit on the gravelly side. Andrew, what do you want to say?
Yeah, China's very straightforward. We've got to confront them head on. If you look at Germany and Russia and the energy, they sleepwalked into a very bad position. It's not actually people's fault that Chinese spies are targeted, and we have to be realistic there. But what we've got to do is we've got to have a month in the summer around Tiananmen Square Day. We've got to start to confront China within universities, and we got to put them on the back foot, because they're very good at spying and deception. If you look at the statement they put out this morning, they're putting a lot of effort into this and we're putting none. And if you look at Starmer grovelling to them for money, they can pull the plug on the money. And I think it's the case in relation to if Paris confronts Russia. If Paris votes for the Russian debt to be taken to one side, both China and Moscow said they'll dump French bonds and bring France down. They have that they could do that to us tomorrow. Yeah. So let's all play grown-ups here. This is serious. And Keir Starmer grovelling to the EU, that's exactly what he was going to do. And what he's clever at is they're going to rearrange the local councils. So what happens is they get control of each council now, just like London, and they'll drag councils down so they look like third world economies with rickshaws driving around.
Well, that's the thing. This is the reorganisation where you haven't got two tiers of, district council, local council, and county council, whatever. I'm quite in favour of that. But then they're delaying council elections as part of this, which is, again, how convenient when you know that you're facing this reform threat.
And if you look at Nazi Germany, what did they do? They got all the little nations, they got control of them. So think about it. These are little component parts of the UK. If they control them, then the actual vote at the top doesn't matter. Labour infects local government stronger. That's
an interesting... a lot of people might have a bit of a conspiracy there, but my thing is, of course China are spying on us. Of course they're working this way. They see us as a weak link. I think most of Europe is a weak link as well. But, money talks, and we have basically sold our politics, sold our economy to the likes of China and Middle East potentates, and you buy up everything, please, we'll have your money, and then they, as you say, they can pull the rug out from us, which is what they threaten with all the African nations, South American, Caribbean nations. They build some infrastructure, and then if something goes wrong, they go, we might call in our debts, and that's how they operate. But maybe we should start doing the same thing.
Yeah, but look at those poor people, those Uyghur people in concentration camps. Yeah. What makes you think they wouldn't do that to you and me?
Exactly. Nothing makes me think they wouldn't do that to us. Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Appreciate that call. Let's go to Vernon. He's in Staffordshire. Vernon, what do you want to say?
Julia, the country voted to leave the EU. It didn't vote for a halfway house.
Yep.
We should have left with no deal. And here we are now. We're fumbling about We're about to bow to our European masters. And it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. I'm on my way to a business meeting in Paris at 2 o'clock. I will supply my customer with the goods. He will pay the duty. If I buy goods in from China, I will pay the duty and the tariffs that are included.
Yeah.
It's really simple. No deal. Well, you operate on tariffs. It's a business it's a way of doing business throughout the whole of the world.
Yep.
And unfortunately, Keir Starmer now, Julia, he's probably worse than Putin, I have to say.
In what way?
Because you're in a situation, well, every way. On January the 20th...
I mean, he's not... I mean, I don't have much time for Starmer, but I don't think, last I heard, that he's actually a murderous, tyrannical dictator.
Well, he's doing a lot, Julia. On January the 20th, we've got conveniently 3 court cases. The people in Manchester, they haven't been taken to court yet.
Yeah.
He wants to rearrange council elections. He wants mayor all over the country. He's never here. Immigration is off the scales.
Yeah.
Julia, this is all very frightening.
He's not a good prime minister. I can agree with that. I don't think it's like when people. I don't think people need to compare someone to Putin or the usual Ken Livingstone style Hitler. To make the point. But Vernon, I really appreciate your call. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, it's interesting that and going back to what Andrew said about we need to confront China head on, and you've got Starmer and everyone grovelling to the Chinese for money. And this is what we've had. We had this with Bahrain. We've had this with UAE. We have this with China. And basically, in politics, money talks now.
No, absolutely. But also, I think it's about having a clear sense of your own potential vulnerabilities and not outsourcing that to other countries or to foreign businessmen to such a degree that you just leave yourself in a precarious position. I mean, the fact that we're in the process of selling the post office to a Czech oligarch doesn't strike me as particularly sensible, even though the Czech Republic is not a country that we have necessarily too much problems with. So it's just one of those things of, yes, there are the kind of facts of geopolitics. China is this enormous rising power. It's something which, because it has been basically handed the kind of role of the manufacturing hub of the world, that it's going to press that particular strength that it has. But at the same time, people should just be sensible and take the kind of measures as a country to protect your own interests that you would take against any kind of foreign power.
Yeah, indeed. But I just don't trust the politicians to be able to do any of this sensible stuff. We'll talk about all of this up next in just a couple of moments with Sir Ian Duncan-Smith. Of course, he, sanctioned by the Chinese government for speaking out against them. We'll talk to him up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK on DAB+. on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for your company. Tom Slater's still with us. Delighted to be joined now by Conservative MP, former party leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, to talk about where we are with China and indeed a bit of Brexit too. Sir Ian, thank you for joining us. You, of course, have been very clear about where we should stand with China, which is why you are one of the number of MPs sanctioned by China. I'm not sure a country you'd feel safe to go to anyway, even without that sanctioning. But, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister to really kind of step up, toughen his stance with China. There's a lot of concern that we're talking about thousands of spies, such as Yang Tengbo, H6 as he was known until yesterday, getting close to people like Prince Andrew, getting photographs with the two prime ministers and another member of the royal family, and basically getting to the heart of the British establishment. First of all, how big is the threat? And second of all, what should we do about it?
Well, yes, Julia, thank you for coming me on. I think the main problem is to understand that China poses the single greatest threat that we face at the moment since the Cold War. It's not me that's saying that alone. President Xi of China has made it very clear his ambition is to be the powerful nation that can dictate to others. He's talked about the last 200 years as an aberration in democracy. He's made the very simple point that the right form of government is his form of government, that democracy is just a passing fad, and that in actual fact people are happier when they're told what to do rather than them having choices about who governs them. He's clear about that. He set a target to build up his military. I'll give you a fact which is quite interesting. Right under our eyes, China has about 230 times the capability of the United States to build ships, naval ships at the moment. One shipyard in China builds at the moment more naval ships than the United States of America. One shipyard. They're doing this in open view, and their view is to have a navy that can compete directly with the United States and probably beat it. And the army is being built up as well. It's probably the largest army now in the world, and it's growing in strength and potency. So those military aspects go on. In the meantime, domestically, China practices genocide on the Uyghur in Xinjiang and using them for slave labor. Loads of Tibetans, 250,000 of them, are at the moment in incarceration camps who are being used as forced slave labor. I'll give you a very good example of what goes on. That they are the biggest organ harvester in the world. They do this through the executions. They sell more organs to everybody else. And, of course, they export solar arrays and everything else to do with net zero to us, which has got slave labor components. And we now discover, of course, they were shipping tomatoes via Italy that had slave labor again from Xinjiang. So the list goes on, and they are a distinct threat.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. They are a distinct threat. You've been talking about this for a long time. We've been talking on the show about this, but it seems the establishment is just still a bit starry-eyed about any amount of money. And of course, we see their roots, their tentacles reaching into the whole of academia and to our establishment. And again, we know that someone like Prince Andrew, a useful idiot for countries like China, and indeed many of the so rather questionable billionaire figures from various countries around the world. I mean, basically, He's never met a dodgy billionaire he doesn't like. Should we put it that way? But he's an easy target. But that has enabled people like this spy, Yang Tengbo, so alleged spy, to get his tentacles in. Talk about the threat now. Look, I'm assuming that we are also spying on China, and that we've got British people over there, or people who bought and paid for, or whatever, in China doing similar work. Why should anyone be worried about that if we're doing exactly the same? I'm assuming the Chinese are, the French are, and everyone else is as well.
Yeah, listen, of course we have to be careful, and our national security requires that we know what people are up to. But China is on a whole different scale. So the real threat comes from this huge organization, and it's just astonishing. 40,000 people in it. They have networks all over the world. and they have networks, huge networks in the UK. There are many, many Chinese students pretty much taken over most of the foreign student population in our universities.
Yeah.
And many of them are postgrad students, and many of them come from security universities in China. And they often, as we've discovered, have ended up on defense contracts as postgraduate students. Huawei have set up their headquarters in Cambridge. And what is interesting about that is we said that Huawei apparently was a real threat, which is why we couldn't award them the 5G contract. Yeah. But they've got their headquarters still here. Why does a company that's considered a threat allowed to sit right beside?
Well, this is the thing. So MI5, MI6, the security service, everyone believes them to be a threat. We're constantly told this. So why is nothing being done? And as I put to you earlier, what should we be doing?
Well, we should be ferreting out all these individuals from the United Front because their task is to get close to the establishment, political establishment and others. The very idea that a member of this organisation should have been allowed to get close to a member of the royal family without the security forces saying, hold on a second, what the hell is this bloke doing there? And I'm pretty certain they were already tracking him.
Yeah. So the point when they know that this guy is sort of basically part of the pitch at the palace, the Prince Andrew's, his entrepreneurial scheme, which he used the palace's name and actually the palace itself for these events, even though he was actually on the take on it himself. It wasn't philanthropic. He was taking 2% of any deal. But so security services would have had suspicions about this guy. He's meeting people at the palace. He's got these roles. Why wouldn't, or do you think it might have happened and was ignored? Someone, they go to the palace. They say to Prince Andrew, "Yeah, you need to drop this guy because this guy is definitely dodgy." Why wouldn't that have happened?
I do not know, other than they might have been tracking to see who else he was in contact with for a while, and I can understand that. But eventually they decided to kick him out. But the main point was, you leave him talking. And in fact, the members of the royal family have gone to China, and he's one of them, the Duke of York. And, of course, while he was there, he was shepherded by this individual as well. So all of this is part of it. But, it's the tip of the iceberg, really. There's just huge numbers of individuals. You've got illegal police stations threatening dissidents with their families on television, being threatened they're going to arrest them and they'll do hard labour, etc. All of this stuff goes on. And what is really interesting is I was talking to the universities about a year ago, and most of the universities confess that they are now so dependent on Chinese money that if they were not to get the Chinese students, they would probably not be able to finance all the other students.
Yeah, well, tough, I would say. At that point, tough. I just find it extraordinary. Again, we've just been bought and paid for, and it's absolutely terrifying. And China, it's a deliberate policy by them. I don't know if we're going to resolve this anytime soon, and I'm certainly not sure. I mean, I think David Cameron and George Osborne were totally on their knees to China. I think Keir Starmer's going to be it as well. In terms of our economy, and so much of the rest of Europe. And we've walked into this, despite people like you talking about this very openly. Do you also think we're going to be sleepwalking back into the EU? There's lots of talk now about us going back in under sort of by hook or by crook by Keir Starmer. Of course, spent 3 years trying to campaign for the EU referendum result to be overturned by another referendum before it had even been enacted. Now talk about us going back into the European Court of Justice as part of a reset of EU relations. What do you make of that?
Well, it would be a disaster, and it would be a terrible blow to those who voted for it.
Can we stop it?
Yeah, we have to stop it.
How can we? He's got a massive majority.
Well, what's become very obvious now is everything he said beforehand was simply not true.
Yeah.
About what they planned to do, what they wouldn't do, all the guarantees about where, Brexit was voted for, we're not going to go back. But what they do is they strip away bits and pieces, piecemeal. So it might be a fishing agreement here to let our fishermen down again. That helps France come on side on something else. And slowly, bit by bit, we end up getting closer and closer till finally somebody says, do you know what? We might as well really be in because we're kind of half in with no say, which is what will always be the main bit. Well, we don't have a say now, so let's get back in and have a say. And this is ironic, really, because at the time globally when the European Union is losing its power and potency, I mean, its economy, there was a very good figure I saw the other day that over the last decade, America and Europe were roughly about the same size economically. America was about 13 trillion and the EU about 10 years ago was about 12 trillion, something like that. I think the EU's gone up to around about 13 trillion, and America in the succeeding 10 years has gone to 23 trillion.
Yep.
So a growth by 50%. Who do you really want to go and do trade with? We trade better with America than anyone else. We have a trade surplus with the United States. You'd think he'd want to prioritize with Donald Trump a trade deal. And Donald Trump wants to do a trade deal. He really rather likes the United Kingdom and probably overlooked the fact that we've got a terrible left-wing government. But he would do a trade deal. And you'd want to do that because there's such huge opportunities in a growing economy like the United States. But no, they want to go back to what's that lovely thing about the burnt finger returns to the flame? Well, that's what Labour are all about. And
Absolutely.
China is part of this, by the way. They were constantly saying in opposition they'd be tough on China and criticising the Conservative government. But in reality, what they've done is they sound now and look like a kind of failed George Osborne tribute band.
Wow, what a concept. Well, I think the general rule, I think, with this government is definitely whatever Keir Starmer said before he became a Labour leader, and then won't say anything he said in the election campaign, just assume it's the opposite of that, and that's what's going to happen. Serena Douglas-Smith, thank you very much indeed for joining us, former Conservative Party leader. Just quick from Tom Slater, we're going to be talking actually about more failures in Europe. We're going to talk to Rolf Schellhammer next about that no confidence vote lost by your German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. It is extraordinary. We've got Macron and Olaf Scholz. I mean, German and the French leaders, supposed to be some of the leaders of the free world, they've got no power at home, collapsed governments. But let's go and tie ourselves closer to them.
I think it's just proof that the Remainers, particularly in the media and politics, claim they cared so much about Europe. They never pay attention to what's actually going on there. If they did, they would realise it's ridiculous to be talking about hugging the EU close precisely when its core member states and powers are in free fall politically and economically.
Absolutely. 10:48 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Gave away, I think of the 1,750 odd licenses for fishing in the Channel, over 40% have gone to the European Union. They take a massive amount of fish out of our water already. And what Starmer said before he became Prime Minister, you might recall this, he was in Montreal, he thought he was off camera, and he said, if I were to become Prime Minister, I would align us so closely with the EU that people wouldn't even be able to tell whether or not we were members.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you very much indeed for your company. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater from Spiked Online is also here. Don't forget to get your calls in on any of the topics we're talking about. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, particularly asking about this Chinese spying row. What should Britain do, if anything, about the threat from China? Just been hearing from Ian Dog-Smith about how serious that threat is. Should the government toughen up? Also, sneaking Brexit failure, or Brexit exit, I suppose, by the back door. Keir Starmer and his Downing Street press officers refusing to rule out us rejoining the European Court of Justice. I mean, they're going to undermine Brexit, do it by the back door. Are they going to get away with it? And how do we stop it? Love to hear your thoughts on that. As I say, the number to call, 0344 499 1000. Among the very good reasons not to join the EU again, by hook or by crook, is also the fact that the EU is in a terrible state, as we saw a lot of disunity in the early months of the Ukraine war, but also the abject failures of two of the major governments. We've seen the collapse of Macron's government. He is on his fourth Prime Minister this year in France, with the collapse of the French economy just at any moment now. And also the same for Germany, their industrial base collapsing, their economy collapsing, and now their government collapsing. Elections very soon after a vote of no confidence in the Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Let's talk about this with Ralph Stolhammer. He's a political theorist and a professor at Webster University in Vienna. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us. So, listen, for those of us who don't spend our days following German politics in great detail, what's happened to this so-called traffic light coalition?
Well, so the German government collapsed, but it was quite interesting. You mentioned it in your introduction, that more or less from France to Germany, significant parts of Europe have become ungovernable. And the reason for this, I believe, is we experienced what I call the Barack Obamization of continental European politics, which is that it's only the voters who can disappoint the politicians, but never the other way around. Although I would say you see this partially in Britain as well. And it's also a little bit, I have to admit, the fault of the voters, because you have like 20-25% who are willing to give new political movements a chance. But a good 70%, for whatever reason, it seems that they have fear of their own courage when it comes to actually, going to the voting booth. And then they say, let's try it with the old guys who drove the car into the ditch. Let's give them another chance. And that's really the problem. That's the difference, as Mr. Ian Duncan said, or Sir Ian Duncan said before, but I think that's the difference.
But basically, that is different. With our first past the post system here, very different voting sort of power that you can have as an individual voter from the proportional representation you have in elections in France and Germany, say.
I think that's true, but on the other hand, the people know what's at stake.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. You're absolutely correct. But at the end of the day, everybody knows the rules of the game. And as we saw in the United States, remember, during Barack Obama, we were told that, there will never be a Republican president again in the United States, because the way the system, the electoral college, everything is set up, it benefits the left, it benefits the pro-migration
demographics,
party, it benefits Democrats. But then people said, you know what, this is not working for us, and they switched their allegiance. Yeah. I think that in Europe, not enough people are willing to do it. By the way, that's unfortunately also true in the UK. I'm not saying who is the answer, because I have my issues with all parties.
Yeah. But the willingness to say we'll try something new. But specifically going on what's happened in Germany.
Yes.
You've had this coalition, this traffic light coalition.
Well, the German elections would have taken place in 2023 anyways. They would have been in the fall, and now they're in February, because the smallest partner of the coalition government, the Liberal Party, the so-called Free Democrats, every poll shows that they will not pass the 5% threshold, so they will not make it into parliament at all. Right. So they started to panic, and they found the backbone when it became ever more clear that they probably will not be represented after the next election. So there's a lot of attempted gamesmanship going on. But the most interesting part was yesterday, after there was the vote of no confidence for Chancellor Scholz. He gave a speech basically saying, I don't understand what's going on. We did such an exceptional job. We were stabbed in the back after doing the best for the German people.
So just an abject, complete lack of understanding of what's happened. But this is the fascinating thing. Again, we've seen in Germany, again, with European elections. We saw in France, we've seen in other countries, Austria, your native Austria as well, where we are just seeing more and more parties on the right, often deplored as the far right. Now, some of these parties have some pretty questionable views, in my view. An awful lot of them are simply representing majority opinion on issues, things like immigration, but also net zero. But all of this ties into not just cultural values, but also, crucially, the economy. Now, Germany for years has been the economic, powerhouse of Europe. But they have hugely high energy costs. They were very reliant for so many years on Russian gas. That got switched off, and then it's all gone very badly wrong since. They've also totally fully engaged on the net zero drive, and their economy, once a powerhouse, now a basket case. That has implications for the whole of Europe, doesn't it?
No, I think you're right. And just if you allow me a little comparison, what you say is absolutely correct. But look at it from this perspective. Imagine you need life-saving surgery, but the only surgeon who can do the procedure, also happens to cheat on his wife. So you might say, my God, that's a horrible human being, but he's the only one who knows how to save my life. And that's a little bit the situation I believe we see in continental Europe with these so-called hard right, far right, whatever parties you want to call them. I think in all the issues that matter, in order to ensure the survivability of the nations of Europe, they are right. Yes, they say occasional things that I disagree with. Yeah. Yes, they have the occasional disgusting or unsavory party member. But on all the major issues, they tend to be correct. For me, they are like this kind of surgeon who might be, morally abhorrent, but he's the only one who knows how to hold the scalpel and save the patient. And Europe is a patient at the moment that needs saving.
And people are holding their noses and doing that. So the next elections could be early in the new year. Who do you think's going to end up being Chancellor of Germany?
Well, they already kind of said it. I mean, the leader of the CDU, the Conservatives, Friedrich Merz, will most likely be Chancellor. But he already said he's only going to enter into a coalition with either the Greens or the Social Democrats. So this is going to be a continental...
So this is effectively, again, it's like Conservatives going to coalition with the Labour Party.
Precisely. We had this conversation almost 2 years ago, Julia, when we said the problem is, and that's true with net zero, but also with general politics, it's like a car driving towards a cliff. Yeah. And the people say, turn the car around. But what's happening in Germany and other parts is, you know what? We take the foot off the gas just ever so slightly, but the direction is still the one that's going to lead you over the cliff, and that's the big issue.
Absolutely. Rav Scholhammer, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tom Slater, I mean, it's amazing, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, very wisely, Keir Starmer totally obsessed with us getting back in with Europe. That's where our future lies economically and politically, when in both grounds, the powerhouses of Europe are completely and utterly failing. And on the same grounds, I think that this government's going to fail on immigration and net zero, both of which are driving an end to our nation's culture, cohesiveness, but also our economy.
And Olaf Scholz is a deeply unpopular, deeply uncharismatic centre-left leader who has just been brought down by a mix of his own Green and his Green zealotry and a rested population upset about immigration. If that sounds familiar, Keir Starmer should probably
very familiar, doesn't it?
More attention.
But no one seems to be willing to learn the lessons. I mean, Macron's a completely different character. Because it's just all Macron, ego, isn't it? But it is extraordinary. And again, at a time when we're facing these threats from Russia, threats from China, we've got instability to the extent in America, to waiting for Donald Trump to take office. We need to have some coherence and some people we can deal with. And no one knows who's in charge. And that is quite a big issue. And you don't have the gravitas. I mean, God, Angela Merkel made a lot of mistakes, but at least, you knew she was in charge. It's absolutely fascinating. And again, this stuff, you think it doesn't matter? It impacts us because it impacts our economy. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Back after an update on the news. Plenty more to come. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very, very good morning to you. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. And whether you're listening on DB Plus Radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, great to have your company. Great also to have your company of Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Very, very good morning to you. Nice to have someone in the studio who's not ill. Honestly, Sam and me
not for
just
long,
sat
by the
here.
sounds of it.
Yeah. No, I infected everyone last week. I was patient ground zero last week. I've infected everyone I'm going to infect now. I'm done now. I hope you're all surviving. Anyway, the voice is a bit back today. Hopefully we'll survive to the end of the show. Going to talk more in the show about Keir Starmer having to defend developing closer ties with China. But should we have closer ties with China? Basically, the more money they give us, the more trade we have, the more of a power they have over us as they buy up our universities and, frankly, it would appear, buy up our royals as well. This despite Beijing having thousands of agents, it's now believed, who could be emulating the alleged spy Yang Tengbo, who befriended Prince Andrew. Goodness me, he was basically at his side. He called himself the Duke of York's envoy at some events in China. That's a pretty close relationship. What a surprise! Prince Andrew has agreed not to go to the Royal Christmas at Sandringham. So probably fewer really, really tacky jokes at the table, not just coming from the crackers this year. I'm sure everyone's thrilled that Sarah Ferguson's not going as well, but there we are. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Plus, I'm going to talk about Lucy Letby. Now, the killer nurse, as she is technically, because she is a convicted killer of a number of babies, her defence team is seeking a fresh appeal on the grounds that the chief medical witness for the prosecution has now changed his mind about some of the babies involved in her murder trial did actually die. There have been an awful lot of questions being raised about whether or not this is a grave miscarriage of justice, and she's just been basically convicted on the basis of some dodgy statistical evidence about she was the one who was on duty every time. We'll talk about that. Also, Nigel Farage hitting out at two-tier justice after the woman who threw a milkshake over him avoided jail. Big question marks about the rather politicised judgments and sentences from the judge in that case. And today is the final day of the Post Office inquiry. This as lawyers representing sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses who were wrongly prosecuted. Some 900 were due to the faulty Horizon IT system. They reflect on the evidence given to the inquiry. We're not expecting a report until later next year. As I say, this is Talk. Welcome to the home of common sense. Welcome also again to Tom Slater. Let's talk more about this Chinese spy, alleged spy, Yang Tengbo. He was named in the courts yesterday after being only identified as H6 previously. He was Prince Andrew's man in Beijing. He was involved in his, pitch at the palace, entrepreneurial efforts, which I think we all thought were wonderful charitable efforts, but no, the Prince Andrew gets 2% of any of the big investments. This man has been working his way for 20 years into the heart of the British establishment, and because he's obviously coming from this organisation, United Front, with tens and tens of thousands of Chinese operatives, huge sums of money are available for investment and wining and dining, was able to work his way into Prince Andrew's close business and even his personal circle. He was invited to Prince Andrew's 60th birthday party. Now, Prince Andrew has long been a useful idiot for, as I say, he's never met a dodgy billionaire he doesn't like, whether he's a paedophile or just, so how did you make your money type billionaires. I'm sorry, he's been bought and paid for many, many times over, Prince Andrew. Where does he get the money to pay for everything? Because he's not getting money from the king or the late Queen anymore. There's some big question marks, and I think we do have a right to know to see his. I think his finances need to be fully publicly opened up at this point. But there's no doubt at all that someone having influence with Prince Andrew is not as important as someone having influence over our government. Do you think that Keir Starmer should try to sort of move away from China, or do you think that he should continue his efforts to very blatantly cosy up to President Xi?
I think the politics of this have changed pretty significantly because of this story. This is something which has been a long-running issue. You gave an update earlier about the Christine Lee case, who was seen to be essentially kind of interfering. She's lost her appeal now, but seen to be kind of interfering and acting on behalf of the Chinese government, particularly around the MP Barry Gardiner, who did a lot of work on the China question. So this was something that's been rumbling on for some time, and I think because this story has become so high profile, because it does have Prince Andrew attached to it, as I, like many people, was shocked that he showed the lack of judgment to allow something like this to happen again. I'm sure everyone else is trembling. If it could happen to Andrew, it could happen to any of us. But it's going to put a lot of pressure on him, and this is also just a question that successive prime ministers have had to confront, which is it's quite clear you can't, one will always have to do business with China, one will always have to deal with China.
It's the second biggest economy in the world, and it's where we get all our cheap stuff from.
But as with dealing with any country, you wish they wouldn't do it in such a way that would leave them open to situations in which the national interest isn't properly served.
Let's just let them buy up our universities. Let's let them to bar for politicians, and the fact that anyone, Cameron, Osborne, and everyone thought it was a good idea. Yeah, let's let a Chinese company, Huawei. By the way, all Chinese companies are required in their own documentation to actually, under the law in China, to basically give any information and give any help to the Chinese government if the Chinese government requests it. End of. So any major Chinese company effectively works for the Chinese government, which is a hostile nation state, a totalitarian, despotic, murderous regime. I mean, I don't know why people think this is complicated, but yeah, let's let them run our 5G internet service or phone service. They actually thought that was a good idea. The fact that that was even considered and wasn't immediately laughed off. Why don't we have the technology ourselves? The reason why we have to buy all this cheap stuff is because you can't run a okay, we've got costs of labour here. Much easier to sell cheap stuff if you've got slave labour in camps making it. Don't seem to have an issue with that apparently. But also, if you're using cheap and plentiful coal, you can power your factories very easily. We've made our energy some of the most expensive in the world, so what a surprise we can't make cheap stuff here, so we import it from abroad. Well, we've put ourselves in this position.
No, absolutely, and it's one of those things where even when you're not talking about particularly sensitive areas from a national security perspective or any of these kind of debates that have been stirred up recently, the fact that the university sector would basically fall over tomorrow if China decided to, I don't know, lock down again in response to a certain thing, so they didn't have the kind of influx of international students who are keeping those universities afloat, is a problem, regardless of all of the other questions.
Our university system should be able to prop itself up without us having to be nice to the Chinese.
Absolutely, or just be at the whims of global events.
Well, and we know some of the criticism. Again, and as we've seen this the same with net zero. And people go, oh, well, this university report, this academic report, this research says X or Y. Yeah, basically, if you question climate change, you don't get any funding because the billions upon billions upon billions that goes into funding a lot of this research only comes to your university if everyone plays ball. There'll be a quiet, you ain't publishing that, matey, and that's exactly what happens. So anything that's criticising China will just quietly disappear. I find this extraordinary we've allowed this to happen. I do not understand why we are willing to sell ourselves to the highest bidder in this country.
Well, I think it's a byproduct of our own failures. The fact that we've been quite happy to sort of allow ourselves to deindustrialise because we thought we could just outsource it.
Well, we'll just become a nation of providing services because people don't need to eat or have fridges or cars. We'll just buy those in from somewhere else.
We don't need domestic industry. We don't need these different things. And of course, you want to shift towards industries of the future and so on. But it's still it's one of those things where often a negative situation has been turned into a positive in a perverse.
Well, we're told we should be shifting to industries of the future while we watch. The whole of the West has sat and watched while China has bought up all of the rare minerals. So that they're in charge of it. They've got all the lithium, they've got all everything that goes into mobile phones, chips, car battery, you name it. The solar panels, the wind turbine. They own it all. Yeah. They have bought up everything.
So this is why I always pose the question, particularly people who are very excised by the China issue, is this is in large part because of many Western countries' willingness to just embrace kind of managed decline as much as it is, the rise of China. Of course, that's a clear thing, but we've left ourselves so much more exposed and reliant on various other kind of international.
Can I just read you a quote that's come out from the Chinese embassy? One of the things I do rather love about the Chinese, and the Russians do this as well, where they'll actually do a press conference and they'll put out a statement saying, well, no. I mean, Putin could literally push someone out of a window, and the Russian embassy would say, "Don't know what you're talking about. Why are you?"
There was no window in that.
Putin was not there. Look at Putin. He's in Hawaii. Yeah. The blatant lies they do because they get away with it for years. Same with the Chinese. But the Chinese are always just it's always more in sorrow than in anger, isn't it? It's always, we're so horrified. So a spokesman for the Chinese embassy today has said that UK should immediately stop creating trouble in the wake of the Chinese spy scandal. In a statement, they said that anti-China clamours made by a handful of UK MPs, Ian Duncan-Smith, Tom Tugendhat is talking about you, have revealed their twisted mentality towards China. I believe this is what the young people call gaslighting. So basically, like, you think that we're beating you up. No, when you got that black eye after my fist hit your face, no, that was you walking into my fist or making it up. And that's what they're saying.
I mean, it's but you know, this is to be expected, isn't it? It'll be what the big question, I suppose, is like how, as you say, Starmer responds to this, and whether the politics of it changes at all.
Do you think Starmer is in a position? Now, again, Starmer, no one has a higher opinion of Starmer's intellectual abilities than Keir Starmer. But do you think he's up to dealing with the likes of Xi? I mean, Xi can run. I always think Putin and Xi are going to run rings around this guy.
I mean, there has always been that tendency of British political leaders to kind of slightly overestimate their own sort of stature on the world stage. But when he did go and meet Xi Jinping recently, it did look like a world leader meeting a kind of parish councillor, really.
Yeah,
It just in terms of the optics of it. He doesn't, and just as an individual, Keir Starmer doesn't command much authority, let alone, you know, the UK's broader place in the
indeed.
world.
Well, I want to hear your thoughts on all of this, please. After the Chinese spying row, what should Britain do about the threat from China? If anything, you might think it's not. You might just think, I don't get what the big deal is. I think you're wrong in thinking you don't get what the big deal is, but I'd love to discuss that with you. And if the Chinese embassy is watching or listening, do get in touch as well. I'd love to have a chat. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at Talk TV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Now, everyone's also very exercised about this bombing that killed the Russian general Igor Kirillov, who looks exactly like, genuinely, if you were doing Hollywood casting. Can I have someone to please come in to play the role of a Russian general called Igor Kirillov? Yeah, this is exactly what this guy would look like. He's basically been charged in Ukraine only yesterday with crimes of basically being involved in the bombing, some chemical weaponry. But he's in charge of nuclear protection for Russia, mysteriously dying in this bomb attack. I mean, should we be concerned about this escalating?
Well, there's certainly the potential for that, a kind of tit-for-tat breaking out. This was probably always bound to happen as we go into the final few weeks, really, before Trump comes in, whereby you've got both sides trying to speed up certain plans they had to get as much advantage as they possibly could. This happening in Moscow as well, just, you know, a few miles from the Kremlin, will also be particularly significant. It's the sort of thing that the Russians can't really just send out people to state media and lie about. People know it has taken place. People know what this means. And so whilst there's always that fear of escalation, I always think that can sometimes be a bit of a red herring discussion in a situation where these two sides have been taking lumps out of each other on the battlefield for 3 years.
Yeah, indeed. Let's also talk about more stories at home. It looks like the UK could be returning to the European Court of Justice's powers. Keir Starmer wants, as part of his trade deal and basically resetting a relationship with the EU. We spoke to Ian Duncan-Smith about this. We've spoken to you about it already as well. But there's no doubt at all that Keir Starmer is on a mission, as he has been ever since 2016, for Brexit not to happen or to undo Brexit by the back door. I think he's going to do this. I think it's exactly it's what the civil servants want, it's what the Foreign Office wants, it's what most of the Labour Party want, the Lib Dems as well. Quite a lot of Tories, frankly, want this as well. Question, will he get away with it?
I fear that he will, just because I think this issue has fallen down the agenda to a certain extent. I think a lot of the Brexit
Not for our audience.
No, not at all. And I think there's something there that for the pro-Brexit factions within Parliament, or very diminished though they are at this point, really need to start making a lot of noise about this. Because what we're kind of edging towards, really, is almost the worst of all possible worlds. We're going to be aligned with EU rules, we're going to be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, but without the meagre say.
Well, as you were saying earlier, of course, the point at that point, the point that they'll say, we may as well rejoin. But the thing is, we can't rejoin. The terms on which they would allow us to rejoin, if Keir Starmer was on his knees begging to be able to, which is what he wants to do, we wouldn't have the rebate that Thatcher negotiated. It'd be huge sums of money. They'd expect us to bail out all these basket case economies. The terms would be absolutely deplorable. I think you had a second referendum, promise you. I mean, there's no way they can go back in without a referendum.
Yeah.
If we had it, and they don't do. Look, politicians don't like referendums because the public get to have their say. They don't like that. That's the whole point. That's why they like the EU, so the public doesn't get to have its say. It is fascinating, by the way. They think we'd be better off ruled by Europe. This is Europe where people have been voting for what they believe to be far-right parties. Isn't that extraordinary? They can't... But we're the bigots here. Yeah. It's so difficult to keep up with their mad, erratic thinking.
I mean, you could be very much in a situation very soon where the European Council was led in its key member states by the hard-right populists.
Yeah.
This is something that really didn't scan with the supposed Remainer dream of what the EU and hopefully returning to it would mean. But I do think that people like Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, they're so into technocracy, they are attracted to that idea that voters shouldn't have much say. They're also attracted to it because it means they're kind of released of the burden of having to make decisions, you know, in quite the same way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they hand everything over to the technocrats.
They'd be quite happy being under the thumb of Brussels, I think, in some respects,
absolutely,
even if it doesn't mean having full membership again.
One person who would definitely not be is Nigel Farage. He's criticised the two-tier justice after this OnlyFans model. Another young woman selling her body to men on the internet and thinking that she's empowered, bizarrely, after throwing that banana milkshake at him in Clacton when he was campaigning the general election. I think Nigel Farage is quite right. We saw the result of that sentencing yesterday. We called it out on air. But there's no doubt at all that the judge involved in this, he's made some very questionable judgments. The paraglider, the girls who were in the celebration of the paragliders at the Hamas attack on October the 7th. I was going to say at a Hamas march. That's what they are. They are pro-Hamas marches, these pro-Palestinian marches now. No, they weren't. They were convicted, but they were not actually sentenced to jail. Various other cases, he doesn't seem to have an issue with a man identifying as a woman who's a convicted killer and kidnapper and rapist who said that you should punch TERFs in the effing face. Said that openly, very loudly, in front of many witnesses. Apparently that's not jailable. So maybe it's interesting he doesn't think this is a jailable offence, but people have gone to jail for writing in his court for writing private WhatsApp messages.
No, absolutely. That was one of the cases. There was a police officer, I believe, who was in a
unpleasant
WhatsApp
messages.
Group. Disgusting, racist. Should obviously be condemned. But the question about whether or not private messages should land you in prison, I think that's an obvious no.
My view is that I don't want you being a police officer.
Absolutely.
But I don't see. Your private messages should be your private messages.
And yet, so we're in a situation where to post those disgusting messages in private, off to prison with you, to either luxuriate in the pogrom in Israel. You know, we don't need to send you to prison, and also if you assault a politician, we don't need to send you to prison either. Those are all three decisions which this judge has brought down. I don't think anyone could suggest that doesn't reflect some kind of bias,
no
whether
doubt
it's
at all.
knowing or unknowing. That's very clear.
The politics is massively impacting our judicial system. And again, this is a guy, he's part of the whole diversity, equity, inclusion stuff that massively involved in our judicial system now. Again, you know, so a man who rapes a woman who's in court, the victim has to refer to him as she if he puts on a wig and calls himself Sheila. I mean, and threatening. I mean, women being threatened with going to the police cells, the prison cells, if they don't agree to that. Now, personally, I'd put me in a cell. I don't care. I'm not going to pretend that the man who raped me was a woman. This stuff is mad. And again, it's infected the whole of our establishment. But once it infects your judicial system, you are looking at... This man is signed up to the critical race theory, all of that stuff. And I'm sorry, all this stuff is intensely anti-Semitic as well, which is why I think he didn't have an issue with the glider women. I genuinely think we've got a serious problem in our criminal justice system. The politicisation of it and the ideologisation of it, if such a word existed.
And that's the thing that makes it so difficult, because it's not necessarily, who knows, a case of him consciously thinking, I don't like this person, I do like this person, that cause is just, that cause is unjust. It's the water that the establishment swims in. They don't even know that they have these biases, and that's a big part of the problem.
Absolutely. We're going to be talking in the next half hour about whether or not there were biases in the Lucy Letby trial or not, and also the end of the Post Office inquiry, that long-running inquiry. Will we actually see justice for those many hundreds of sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses at the end of this? We'll talk about all that up next. Going to take your calls, 0344 499 1000, on any of the topics that we are talking about, whether it's the Chinese spy, what we should do about this, whether or not it's Brexit and Keir Starmer undermining it, whether it is Nigel Farage's milkshake attacker not going to jail, and of course that two-tiered justice we now live under. Any other thoughts, do give us a call, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
I'm asking you what he's doing for energy security in Britain. Are you saying you don't know?
I'm literally explaining to you what the job of a Prime Minister is, because the assertion that you made at the start of the interview was it's not his job somehow to represent Britain on the world stage.
No, it's not actually. No, his job is to fix the NHS. His job is to fix. No, his job is to fix the NHS. His job is to fix the economy. The economy is going down the gurgler thanks to the budget by Rachel Reeves, right? So why is he not here fixing that?
Which brings us on to the missions and the plan for change. Correct. The NHS does need fixing.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's also still with us. Coming up, we are going to be talking about the Lucy Letby trial, and we're going to be talking about the Post Office inquiry, which is finally finishing today. Let's get to some of your messages about this Chinese spying row. What should Britain do about the threat from China? A lot of you, I think, are thinking it's not that big a deal. We don't have to worry about it. I mean, maybe we should just ask, here's a good question. Who should King Charles invite to Christmas at Sandringham instead of Prince Andrew and Fergie? There's your question. I want to hear from you on that. We ask all the big questions. I love that Tom Slater, caring not a jot about the royals, wondering. It's amazing how much is focused on that. This is the Chinese spying movie. This is a hostile nation state. They've got their tentacles in every single area of our establishment. Royals, politics, business, academia. They're all research, science, technology. They're all over everything. But yeah, let's all just shrug and carry on, because you know what? They're paying for everything. I'm thinking this isn't a good idea. Similar to, you know, the whole of Europe completely relying on Russian oil and gas. Maybe that wasn't a good idea too. Maybe we need to start thinking about these things a bit more long term. That's my question to you. What should we do about it? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Lots of messages coming in as well. Ethan says, this political establishment needs abolishing. Ted says, our government ministers are in China's back pocket. The UK will do nothing. I think Ted is completely right about this. Alan says, do we know it was a threat? Are we always going to say this stuff? I'm 37. I've been warned about China since, well, forever. Yet nothing has ever happened. Well, apart from the cyber spying, apart from them stealing all of our technological advantages and our idea, I mean, apart from that, Adam says they will do nothing. We're living in troubling times where the government is showing its true colours, but it won't last. Labour will destroy itself. Dave says remove our government and start over with patriots. And Brenda says, well, of course we should consider the threat from China, but maybe we should also consider how poor our royal judgment is when choosing friends. I think this, again, it's not just Prince Andrew. I've still got very big question marks, and I think the police should still be having very big question marks over the Middle Eastern potentates handing over plastic bags of cash to Prince Charles's charities. The fact that it's going to a charity, this is still how these people get influenced. And then his senior courtier offering this guy a peerage or a knighthood, I think. I mean, I'm sorry.
It's almost like selecting people to have very senior positions in the state and in public life purely on the basis of who their mum and dad was is not a very good idea.
I know. I mean, it's weird, isn't it?
Crazy suggestion.
You mean that's not choosing people on merit?
I dare say that might be the case. I dare say Prince Andrew might have exploded the whole game in that respect, who can continue to make blunders is a polite way of putting it, and yet still manage to cause all kinds of damage, not just to the royal family, but also to the British state, potentially, if any of these allegations are true.
What does Prince Andrew have to do to not be allowed at Christmas forever? Now, what I love is that the solution to this is, let's not picture him walking to church. I mean, couldn't he just stay down? I don't have a problem. We've all got black sheep in our families. Okay? You don't. I don't think you should. You and I are not in favour of this cancelling thing. I don't want the guy to be a UK trade envoy. I don't want him to be on the public purse. I couldn't care less which one of the many-roomed palaces and houses that the king lets his brother live in for free. I just don't care. It's not my concern. But I don't necessarily think that someone should be ostracised from their family Christmas because they showed just as much misjudgment as they have always shown. I'm thinking if you're not ostracising your brother because he's hanging out with a convicted paedophile and sex trafficker, Jeffrey Epstein, which he was doing, staying at his house even after that conviction, then I'm sorry. I think your judgment is questionable at that point. But of course, call me old-fashioned, but there we are. I'm sorry, I don't think the king just constantly gets a free pass because it's very, very sadly been treated for cancer. I think the whole sort of gloves are off. I'm horrified for any family, anybody going through this. It's awful when you have two, have both the king and Princess Kate as well. It's very difficult. But I still think the lack of proper scrutiny of the actions and the judgments and the funding for royal family is one of the many abject failings of the British media. Now, the Sunday Times did some amazing investigations into what was going on in terms of financing of some of the Prince of now King Charles's charities, and that all just completely disappeared when he inherited the throne, and I don't think it should. No, absolutely. There is this inbuilt deference. It's the nature of the institution. It's the nature of how the media relate to it. Well, you won't get access if you say nasty things, and they do that. No, absolutely, and it's one of those things where these, whilst their role is diminished from many centuries ago, they still have a significant role in public life. King Charles is our head of state, and also the rest of his family continue to exert influence, have particular positions, given certain benefits as a consequence of their particular role, and for that to be shrouded in more secrecy, the less accountability you have, the more I really object whenever we're talking about inheritance tax and things like that. The Queen's estate isn't subject to inheritance tax. The King's estate won't be. We still don't even know what rate of corporation tax, what rate of income tax any of the royals pay because they're not required to. I mean, I'm sorry, but I think we have a right to know this stuff. I really do expect everyone in this country to be taxed on the same basis. I find it very strange that anyone even could disagree with that. Oh, it's different. I don't think anyone's above me. I don't think anyone's below me. I don't think anyone should be treated as if they are above or below anybody. But there we are. Let's go to the phone lines quickly, though. Let's talk to Helen, who is in Watford. And Helen, you want to get in touch about the very likely Brexit betrayal we're going to see. Hi, Julia. Hello.
I was listening to you talking about the devolution of the councils, that Labour want to change the structure of the councils, and also taking us back into the EU by the back door. I think Keir Starmer is extremely intelligent, and he's going to make changes that are irreversible, a bit like Tony Blair. Well, the same as Tony Blair. I think we're still living under the changes Tony Blair
Yeah, I mean, he
made.
basically set up a million quangos, put his people in all of them, so it didn't matter whether the government changed hands. The same people were still in charge.
Exactly, and I think the same's going to be happening here, and we need to take it much, much more seriously. Tony Blair introduced the Human Rights Act. He also turned the Lord Chancellor's role into another politician, so judiciary lost its head. It's serious, serious changes that the Labour are going to make now, and they're going to absolutely fight all our local councils on this building, so that they're going to have to build on the green belt. These things are irreversible.
Yeah, I want us to build on the green belt. Personally, I think we need more homes. I think we should have fewer immigrants, but I think we need more homes as well.
I disagree. I think we've got enough homes. We've got too many people that shouldn't be living here.
But most of those people now are British.
No, I think there's millions and millions of people that shouldn't be here, that need to be repatriated back to their homelands.
Well, okay, look, anyone who's here illegally, working here illegally, I'd like them gone. But at the end of the day, most people things like because you've got like 5 million people who were here from the EU. They thought it was 3 million. They'd lost count of 2 million. The way you do, they have a right to stay in this country and live here, work here. They've got they need to have somewhere to live.
Our green belt. It's happening in my local area. Absolutely going to devastate it. That's irreversible. That's concreting over our green land.
6% of this country is built on, and that includes gardens and parks. We've got plenty of land to build on.
They're not looking at those areas. They're looking at the farmland, which is being sold, and that's going to now be built on. That's happening in my local area.
Yeah. We should not be selling off farmland. That's for sure.
Okay. And it's irreversible. You can't change it once it's done.
Yeah, no, that is true. I completely agree with you in terms of, Starmer is, I don't think he's as smart as he thinks he is, but yeah, I think there are going to be changes again. And once you've got a government working with the civil servants, so the civil servants working against the last 14 years of Tory government, I think we are going to see a lot more happening that behind the scenes that we kind of don't realise until later on. Helen, thank you so much. Great call. Up next, we are going to talk about the Lucy Letby case and these new demands once again for a fresh appeal after key witnesses in this case has changed his mind. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense, of me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater also with me. Delighted to be joined now by Danny Shaw, who's a policing, crime and justice commentator. A very good morning to you, Danny.
Good morning, Julia. Hi.
Lots to talk about with you today. First up, let's talk about Lucy Letby, because we do have this extraordinary situation where so many people are now saying that they think that there has been a horrific miscarriage of justice, a horrible, horrible injustice done to a young nurse accused of murdering and attempting to murder huge numbers of babies, not just at one hospital where there's the case which she's actually been convicted have happened, but actually another, the Countess of Chester Hospital, but at other hospitals as well. It was claimed yesterday that an expert witness had changed his opinion. Mr. Dr. Dewey Evans had altered his view about how 3 of the babies that had died in her care had died between 2015 and 2016. The expert witness says that actually that Lucy Letby's lawyers' claims are unsubstantiated, unfounded and inaccurate. He said that. So what is going on? Because there are demands for a fresh appeal. We've already had an appeal, but another appeal on the grounds that this is a terrible miscarriage of justice. There isn't the evidence against Lucy Letby that the court thought there was. How strong is that case?
Well, look, I mean, what Lucy Letby's lawyer said yesterday, Mark MacDonald, that the key prosecution witness, Dewey Evans, was unreliable and had now retracted his evidence or changed his evidence with regard to 3 of the babies' deaths. If that is true, Julia, that's a major development, a significant development. There is no doubt about it. If that is the case, as Mr. MacDonald claims. In that event, it would be possible for the Court of Appeal to reopen the case. It only does that in the most exceptional of circumstances. Normally, the only route when someone who's convicted has lost their appeal is to go to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. That's the body that investigates potential miscarriages of justice. That can take months, if not years. But it is possible if a key prosecution witness like this has given the wrong evidence, shown to be unreliable, just had an appeal, it's possible that the Court of Appeal could rehear that case. So that's the route that he's trying to go down, Mark MacDonald, the lawyer for Lucy Letby.
Yeah. Well, let's have a little watch. Let's have a little watch and listen of what Mark MacDonald told Mike Graham and the Talk Breakfast show this morning. This is, as you say, Lucy Letby's barrister, about the case, saying it could be the biggest miscarriage of justice in history. Let's listen and watch this short clip.
It's quite straightforward. The lead expert volunteered himself to the police and gave a series of hypotheses. As he said, looking at the medical notes, each baby died.
And that's Dr. Dewey Evans, right? And he's now changed his mind.
We're now saying this shift in position is of such fundamental importance, the Court of Appeal need to relook at it. What I want to focus on is the evidence. If this is a miscarriage of justice, it's going to probably be the biggest miscarriage of justice we've had in criminal justice history in this country.
Now, what's interesting here, as I mentioned, Danny Shaw, it's a complicated business. This is that this man himself, Dr. Evans, he has said that the criticisms of his evidence by Lucy Letby's lawyers, including Mark MacDonald, are unsubstantiated, unfounded and inaccurate. So it's all very confusing about whether or not he has actually turned on his evidence. Now, I did say earlier that Lucy Letby there had been an appeal. There were cases, there was a sort of court hearings for her to have a chance to appeal. She's been twice refused the permission to appeal against her convictions. Now, there's been a lot of debate in the media. I mean, Peter Hitchens, the leading campaigner on this in the Mail, saying this is a terrible miscarriage of justice. A lot of claims that a lot of the evidence used to convict her was basically sort of circumstantial and statistical, that, well, she was the nurse who was on duty every time these children died or almost died, and that statistically, you know, it would have to be her, etc., etc. But actually, those who've sat in the court case day in, day out, hearing all of the range of evidence, including doctors walking in to find alarms going off and the nurse Letby just standing there over a child rather than helping a child that was intubated in a ward, and that actually the evidence that was presented in court wasn't just circumstantial, it wasn't just statistical and odds, it was far, far wider than that, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I always think you have to give a measure of respect to the jurors who heard all that evidence and sat through it, because we haven't, and the experts who are now coming forward They haven't heard all that evidence. They haven't been in the courtroom listening to the witnesses in person, listening to Lucy Letby being cross-examined for days on end. And so I think you have to give a measure of respect to them. They came up with some verdicts, guilty verdicts on some, acquitted her on others, couldn't decide on others.
Yes, I think that's very interesting. They didn't come back after 2 hours, did they? It took them weeks and weeks and weeks.
It took a long time.
And they said some cases hadn't been proved and some hadn't. Eventually, she got convicted for 15 murders and attempted murders and serving 15 whole life jail terms. But that's it again. When most of us don't, even most court reporters aren't in court for every single day of these trials and don't hear all the evidence and the weight of the evidence. But what is interesting is Lucy Letby apparently is perfectly happy with her defence because she's still employing the same defence team.
Well, I don't think Mark MacDonald represented her at a trial, so I think that is a new appointment.
I think the solicitors she was dealing with, I think, are still partners. But this is the thing, if there has been a terrible miscarriage of justice, then obviously we would want there to be a full appeal. But actually, at the current time, there are other investigations ongoing, aren't there? Because police had investigated far more deaths at this hospital and not brought all of them to court. But also, there are now other deaths of babies at other hospitals where she worked that are being looked into.
Yes, and new revelations coming out in the Thirlwell inquiry, which is looking at the case and what may have gone wrong, the whole circumstances leading up to it, which is raising a lot of other questions. So there is a lot of noise and there are a lot of concerns. I mean, Mr. MacDonald is claiming that 50 or 60 experts, health experts, neonatologists and others, statisticians, have come forward to offer their support for the case. Pro bono, in other words, they're not asking for a fee, and that clearly shows that there is, I don't think we can deny, a measure of concern out there about the convictions and the case. And it may be, Julia, it may be that some things were not done correctly in court and that some of the evidence was incorrect. But it may also be that she was convicted on some counts correctly. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But what you can't have is somehow just tearing up all sort of notions of justice and deciding, well, we're going to rush through this appeal like that. There is a process that has to be followed. She has had a permission to appeal hearing before the Court of Appeal that issued a very lengthy judgment and dismissed those grounds.
I mean, we know the courts have got it wrong before, but I also do wonder again, a pretty young white woman and a nurse, rather more sympathetic character than many of the cases, which languish sometimes 10, 15, 20 years before getting a chance to appeal. And again, these factors should not be remotely relevant, but I hate to tell you, I think they often are when it comes to the campaigners. We shall see again. Is there any question marks over it? I'm very happy for there to be a full appeal, simply so that we can get to the root of where it is. Can I also ask you about a case today? This is involving the sentencing that's happening later today, and this is the sentencing of the father and stepmother of little Sara Sharif, who was beaten and tortured and murdered by them. We've had a statement read in court today by Sara Sharif's mother, Olga Domin. She was not living with her mother at the time. She'd also been suspected of possibly being responsible for child abuse, which is why the courts awarded custody to the father. But she has said... she described her daughter's killers as executioners and said, to this day, I can't understand how someone could be such a sadist to a child. What has come out in court, I cannot understand what is wrong with these people. You're sadists, although even this word is not enough for you. I would say you are executioners. I mean, like dying in behind bars, coming out in a coffin is the only punishment that's good enough for these people, surely?
Well, the judge will decide whether or not the father and stepmother get a whole life sentence. That I think is the big decision that the judge has to make. The two defendants who've been found guilty of murder, whether or not they get a minimum term of 20, 30, 40 years, or whether he gives them a whole life order, which means that they will die behind bars. It is clearly a case which potentially falls into that category because it's the murder of a child. It would appear to be there was some premeditation and it involved abuse, the most horrendous abuse over a long period of time. Yeah. So I think the judge will have to consider that. For the other guilty party in this, the uncle Faisal Malik, He was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment. He won't get a whole life order, but he will get a very lengthy minimum term.
Yeah, it's just the whole thing's absolutely horrific. Now, on a rather lesser scale, obviously, than the horrific murder of a child, but nevertheless an attack on, many of us would say, our democracy. The young woman who threw a banana milkshake over Nigel Farage during the election campaign, she was convicted. She pleaded guilty to assault by beating and also criminal damage. But she has not been sentenced to any time behind bars. She got a suspended sentence, 3 months suspended for 12 months, and also, of course, some community work as well. Is that what you'd expect? Because there are big question marks of a two-tier policing where people are going to prison for writing tweets, even ones they've deleted, but someone who actually throws something over a campaigning politician gets away with it, as far as we can see.
I've got to say, Julia, I think that she's quite a lucky woman not to go to prison. And I think an offence like this against a politician of whatever party during an election campaign in public like that, even though there was minimal damage caused, physical damage.
Thankfully.
Just a cleaning bill. I think a prison sentence sends out a really strong message that kind of behaviour is just not tolerated. We have a system of democracy in our country. If we disagree with people, we argue with them. We, don't vote for them at the ballot box, but we do not assault them, throw things over them. And I think she's very, very lucky to have escaped a prison term.
Yeah, indeed. Danny Shaw, thank you very much indeed for that. Tom Slater, let me just come back to Lucy Letby with you first. So many people have been making the case that Lucy Letby, they believe, is an innocent party. Where do you stand on this?
Well, so far I've seen nothing from, shall we say, the sceptics of her original trial and her original sentence that would make me have pause. It might well be that there are specific failings in the process or some of the specific convictions which may be on balance. The evidence for some of them wasn't as strong. But you often see arguments which I think are just fallacious. The idea that this was clearly something that was going on in the hospital, that they had some kind of other systemic issue and that they were therefore trying to cover it up. Like the idea that it would be better for the Countess of Chester Hospital, for its PR, that they had a serial killer on the loose than rather they had some sort of internal hygiene problem which had led to the deaths of these babies. I find
I wouldn't
difficult.
Put anything past NHS management, though, to be fair.
That is a fair point. But it's one of those things where, of course, people should be able to make these points. Of course, just because a trial has concluded doesn't mean that there shouldn't be grounds for appeal and so on. But me personally, having looked at the arguments, I'm not moved in the direction of
neither am I. Absolutely not. It is extraordinary, isn't it? There's different claims that are being made. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, on all the topics we're talking about. Up next, we're going to talk about the final day of the Post Office inquiry. When, if ever, are we going to get justice? Well, we'll talk to the Conservative peer and key figure campaigning for the scandal to be uncovered, James Arbuthnot. Lord Arbuthnot's up next. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
It's about making sure that people who perhaps have been unable to work because of health or other responsibilities found those opportunities, perhaps part-time to start with, so we could get them back to work, put our own people back to work. And my concern is, with the government beginning to take the foot off the gas on that and making it easier for people to claim benefits with lower expectations for people about getting a job, that means that those people are going to be languishing without the opportunity of work for longer. And we know that having a job is good for your mental health, it's good for your physical health, it's good for your family's financial well-being as well.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
A very good morning to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Also, Tom Slater joining us. And yesterday and today we're hearing closing statements from the Post Office inquiry. Finally, at long last, getting to the end of that long-running inquiry into the Horizon IT scandal. Well, one man who, of course, made a crucial role, if you saw that amazing ITV drama series of what's happened during that whole saga, one man who played a crucial role was the Conservative peer, Lord Arbuthnot. James Arbuthnot, I'm delighted to say, joins us right now. A very good morning to you, sir. Can you hear me, Lord Arbuthnot?
Yeah.
How
yes,
good.
I can hear you.
We've got you. Lovely.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you so much. You've been a key player in the scandal, in trying to expose this scandal and getting these so many wrongs righted. We've seen an extraordinary inquiry. I have to say, I wish the COVID inquiry was moving as fast-paced as this, but we've had 270,000 documents disclosed, more than 2.2 million pages. We've had evidence from almost 300 witnesses, 780 witness statements. We've had the likes of the Post Office boss, Paula Venables, and others, very, very senior figures, people who've never spoken publicly before, being questioned by the Chief Counsel at this inquiry. Do you think that we are actually going to get some real answers about who knew what when, and we'll actually see proper justice being done, by which I mean criminal prosecution of those who perpetrated this awful, awful scandal?
I do think we're going to get justice. I think it's going to be hugely delayed, though. I mean, we know that justice delayed is justice denied, but if we now hear that the prosecutions aren't going to begin until 2027, that is just...
And what is the justification for that? If people are sort of identified in this document, as many expect the inquiry chair to do, as being possible wrongdoers, the police started investigating in 2019, didn't they? Why would it take them so long to be able to prosecute?
Good question. They say that because there are so many documents, as you say, millions of pages, many hundreds of thousands of documents themselves, they say that they have to digest what Sir Win Williams finds in his inquiry, and they won't be able to get on with it. I don't see that myself. I think we've learnt so much from the inquiry that they could get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, as always, these things go, the wheels turn very, very slowly, don't they? Now, we've seen Sir Alan Bates, knighted now, the prominent campaign who'd come to you about all of this.
Yes.
He still waiting for compensation. So much fanfare about all the compensation that these people were going to get and having their criminal records. I mean, 900 people prosecuted, overturned, and justice being done. This clamour from the public and from politicians and others for this to be done after that wonderful ITV documentary, drama series, and yet people are still waiting. There are still people who probably are going to die before they get exonerated, before they get their compensation. What is holding that up?
There are too many who have already died before getting compensation. But the huge piece of legislation that we passed during the summer has given exoneration to hundreds of sub-postmaster victims. And that itself has released many hundreds of millions of pounds to the
because they were convicted, they couldn't claim that money.
Yes, that's it. And so we are now speeding up. Still, there's a shortage of forensic accountants. There's dispute over some of the items that people say that they would have gained if they hadn't had this scandal. And that's a very complicated thing to work out.
Yeah.
I do believe, though, that we're finally getting there. I think it's taking longer than it should. All of these things are taking longer than they should. But we are, at last, getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's taken far too long. Do you think that we will actually see, even if it's not till 2027, anybody going to trial and being convicted and possibly going to jail even for wrongdoing here? Because one of the things that you helped uncover was that senior people at the post office and people involved in the Horizon, the Fujitsu computers involved in the Horizon machinery, they did know that those machines could be fiddled with centrally and it couldn't all be happening in the post office. They allowed a terrible miscarriage of justice to be inflicted on completely innocent people. People ended up, they lost their jobs, they lost their reputations, they lost their families, marriages, some even took their own lives. That someone does need to pay for this.
Yes. Yes. And you ask if I believe that people will. I do believe that. I do believe that people will be prosecuted. I believe that some people will go to prison, maybe, probably, not enough. But I do believe that there will be some successful prosecutions and that there should be some people who will go to prison. But it's all taking too long.
Yeah, as is often the case with these things. Well, you've done a magnificent job campaigning on this issue. Lord Arbuthnot, so appreciate you joining us. So short but sweet, Conservative peer and a post office scandal campaigner. This is the terrible thing, Tom, isn't it? It's just these things take so long. People are dying without getting their compensation.
No, exactly, and it's in that delay that injustice sets in. So hopefully we're edging towards some kind of resolution for those who have remained.
Again, the people, for some of the compensation they've been offered originally doesn't even touch the sides of what it would, losing your reputation and your whole livelihood as well for all those years. Lots more coming up. We're going to be getting the sentencing of Sara Sharif's father, stepmother and uncle. That's coming up any moment now. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you and welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you so much for joining me. You are with Talk, the home of common sense, whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube, on your connected device. Great to have your company. Great also to still have the company of the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater. Thank you for joining us. With you live all the way until 1 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, we are expecting any moment now to get the actual sentences handed down by the judge in the case of Sara Sharif. Her father, her stepmother and her uncle try to just not put expletives in while we're on air because the level of venom I feel towards these horrific child murderers. Allowing the death of a child in the case of the uncle. Don't want to libel him, do I? These horrific people are going to find out what their sentences are. Again, come out of prison in a box, I would say, is the only appropriate one, but we'll be talking about that coming up. Also, Keir Starmer developing closer ties with China has been criticised, and he's been defending that, despite Beijing having thousands of agents, we believe, up to some 40,000 agents who are emulating what the alleged spy Yang Tengbo was doing, befriending Prince Andrew, getting involved in high-level business and establishment roles, just to be a part of the establishment. What is the purpose of this spying, this espionage, influencing public policy? Shouldn't we be stepping back from a close relationship with the Chinese? We could talk about that with security and intelligence expert Professor Anthony Gleeson up next. Also talk about what's going on in Syria. Syria's new leader, Abu Mohammed al-Jalani, him of HTS, he said that he will not allow the country to be used as a launchpad for attacks against Israel or any other state. He also called on the West to lift sanctions imposed on Syria during the Assad regime. Plus, Labour are set, we're told, to ramp up stealth tax hikes for millions of people while denying them a vote in next year's council elections as part of their changes to councils. Also, we're going to be talking more about the Sarson Head pub. Indeed, it has Sarson Head pubs because there are hundreds of them. Pub bosses and punters working at those pubs across the UK have rallied around a landlord who is being sued by a convicted terrorist, no less, because he says he's deeply offended by the name and the pub sign image. Would you believe it or not? This is Talk. We are the home of common sense. Tom Slater, that definitely isn't common sense, that case. Suing for, I think, 1,800 quid, one poor landlord. And then he said, yeah, he's going to go to all the others. They're bandying together, the people who work there, the landlords, the landladies, and indeed the punters. We're happy to join you guys. This is madness. We haven't quite got this sentencing yet. In terms of the sentencing of Sara Sharif's father and stepmother and her uncle for her death. The judge has been talking about the unbelievable degree of cruelty that was involved. I have to say, because of my job, I had to read all the details, and I wish I hadn't. And I did go into some of the detail on air when that case, the conviction actually happened, because I think it's important that when we discuss these monsters that we discuss exactly what they did. But let's not go into too much detail. But suffice to say, a little girl had the most horrific, awful short life because of these monsters. What should the sentence be?
Well, it's hard to reconcile this particular crime, this deep sadism, violence, capacity for sheer evil, frankly, with anything other than making
evil
sure...
is the right word, isn't
exactly.
it?
You know, we don't have to be religious to feel that sometimes something fits the bill. If you've got someone who is extracting a sense of power, a sense of a thrill, who knows, from... Again, you don't want to go into the details, but the kind of violence that, you know, that boggles the mind when you're talking about your own child or any child, frankly. You do think this person, how is this person not going to continue to be a threat? I mean, how do you reform someone out of that? How is this person, you know, 10, 20, 30, even 40 years down the line, still not deserving of the most severe punishment? It's one of those crimes that really fits into a category all of its own, I think. In terms of what should be meted out, because again of the sheer capacity for violence that was meted out on a defenceless young girl.
I mean, I just literally...
Even if you haven't read the details, anything you can imagine is almost what was meted out.
Throw away the key, come out in a coffin, end of. I'm not in favour of the death penalty, but I'm... Judge said, God, I could make a I could make an exception for these certainly the two, the father and the stepmother. Look, I will get you those the judges, as often the case, these are televised. The judge is speaking, giving his sentencing notes, talking about the options available to him, describing the case. As soon as we actually get to the actual sentencing, we will let you know what that is. In the meantime, let's turn our attention back to China and this China spying row. Really want to get some of your calls as well. What should Britain do about the threat from China, if anything? Frankly, judging by the calls this morning, you're more concerned about the threat of us going back into the EU. Brexit undermined by the back door by Keir Starmer. But whatever you want to talk about, do get in touch. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. You can text us on 87222. Get in touch on Talk TV as well on X or Twitter. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. I have a funny feeling you're going to want to have your say on the sentencing of Sara Sharif's father and stepmother and uncle as well. So do get your calls in as soon as we get that result. Right now, let's turn attention back to China and let's talk to Professor Anthony Gleeson. He's an expert in security and intelligence and joins us now. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. My question I've been putting to our audience today, after this Chinese spying row, this man finally named H6, the alleged spy, as Yang Tengbo. The court's basically agreeing to his demand that he be named, even though he was the one who said he didn't want to be named originally. Basically, Prince Andrew's man in Beijing. This man was at the heart of Prince Andrew's business operations, invited to his 60th birthday party. Now, poor old Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, his ex, aren't going to be invited to Sandringham at Christmas. Oh dear, but it's not about who sits where on Christmas Day or is seen with King Charles outside the church on Christmas Day. This is about Chinese spies at the heart of government. So the question is, what should Britain do about the threat from China?
Well, I think the first thing that it needs to do is to ensure that people in influential positions like the Duke of York understand exactly what sort of country China is and what it does. I mean,
I think he does understand. It's a very rich country. They've got a lot of people with a lot of money that can help make him rich. That's what he understands.
Yeah, I think the essential thing that he appears to have missed, and don't let's beat about the bush here, we know what Tengbo got out of the relationship with Prince Andrew. It's the best cover for a spy that you could possibly imagine, to be best mates with the eighth in line to the British throne. It opens doors for you wherever you want to go.
Yeah, you're kind of vouch for. Is there an extent that people would say, well, if he's hanging around and he's involved with Pitch the Palace with something that the King's brother is doing or the then Queen's son is doing, that kind of people go, well, he must have been vetted. He must be okay.
Exactly so. It is unique. Frankly, I can't think of any other a British espionage case which has involved somebody getting as close to the source or one of the sources of power in this country as this case.
Does Prince Andrew have power?
Of course, he has influential power. He's a global celebrity, not always for the right reasons, I should add. But everybody knows him, and you and I are talking about him this morning. And as I say, he remains eighth in line to the throne, and you can sack somebody for doing this and doing that, and somebody can resign for doing this and doing that.
Yeah.
But you can't resign or be sacked for being the brother of the King of England. Yeah. So this is a really big thing. And we know what Tengbo got out of this. We don't know what Prince Andrew got out of it. Yeah. I think that is a really important question now. But to go back to your point, what should Andrew have known? He should have known that in 2017, the Chinese government passed a law, a national security law, placing a duty on every single Chinese person to act as an intelligence agent for the Chinese state in everything that they did. And there was a double duty on Tengbo because he was a member of the Chinese version of the Communist International, the Comintern, the United Front Department in Beijing. So the moment that this man appeared on the prince's horizon, either Andrew or one of his advisors should have said, hang on, think about the Chinese national security.
But hold on a minute. Where were MI5, MI6? Where were they in this? Why? I always thought this was rather strange, like the Jeffrey Epstein situation. Oh, this man has been already convicted of basically child sex trafficking. Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. You should absolutely go and stay at his house in New York to break off your friendship for 4 days the way you do. The fact that security people weren't going, I don't darn well think so, I find extraordinary. Would they have known this guy? Would they have been watching this guy? Did they want to see what this guy did? Do you think they knew, or did they have no idea? And if they had no idea, why didn't they?
I'm sure that at some stage, 2020, 2021, MI5 realised who Tengbo was and what his game was. Remember, he'd been in the UK for 2 decades, studied at York University. My hunch is that he was a long-term penetration agent. He was pushed into the United Kingdom 2 decades ago in order to be able to say, well, I've lived in Britain for 2 decades, I'm entirely honest. We do need to know at what stage MI5 got really serious about him. We do know that they did get really serious about him, because that's how we've got this evidence from Tengbo's phone when cheekily he tried to re-enter the United Kingdom. And everything that I say to you and said to other people kind enough to ask me about it is based on what has come off his smartphone. Tengbo's own smartphone. And what that reveals is not only that Dominic Hampshire, Prince's senior aide in this horrible, disgraceful, shaming business, was the conduit. But in his letters, he writes to Tengbo, you've achieved a position that many people would, give their right hand to achieve. You're a close friend of the prince and his family. Don't forget that. And he adds, you have guided us so that we can do what you want to do without officials interfering and the wrong people presenting themselves. That is all in the letter. That is, in my opinion, verges on the criminal, I have to say, because what it means is that Hengbo, either an agent or an officer of the Chinese intelligence service, we can't be sure, is directing what Prince Andrew does. Now, I say Prince Andrew should have known. I wouldn't be surprised if MI5 had said, we've got worries about this, but probably received the answer to go and boil their heads. Because it shouldn't be assumed that, the royals particularly like the spooks. Most people in government don't like the spooks. Tell them to keep their nose out of their business. So I don't think we can assume straight away that MI5 didn't know about this. But of course,
and even if they warned, whether they were listened to. But this is the thing, isn't it, in terms of what we then do? Because this isn't just about Prince Andrew. As you say, that influence he had, people getting to go to the palace, then being able to go to other events, having a picture with David Cameron and Theresa May and another royal prince. I mean, Prince Michael of Kent is always involved in one of these things, isn't he? I mean, the thing is, people aren't... Often we think of this as, a spy sidling up to someone on a bench in the park in Westminster and basically saying, we've got pictures of you with your mistress, you're bought and paid for, now do what you're told, give us secrets. It's not that blatant most of the time. It's much more subtle. Money doesn't change hands in brown envelopes. It's not, again, it's just sort of the tentacles of the Chinese government, the huge economic might of the Chinese government. These things have much more subtle influences, but those influences are very real. What do we do about the threat of this totalitarian, murderous dictator state wanting to basically break the West and impose their values, lack of them, on the rest of the world? I mean, they're already buying up buying up Africa and South America and the Caribbean. They want to buy us up too. How do we stop that threat?
We say no. We say no. We put more money into our security. We put more money into our security service. They always rather late on the scene, I'm afraid. Now, they would say they react. They're not proactive because we don't want to have a secret police in this country. They'll only to react. I think they have been far too late on the Russia threat, on the China threat, and probably on the Iran threat as well. However, they are now there. We've got to ensure that they've got the resources to deal with these people. But you also have to educate those in power that if they dabble with the Chinese, and you say, Julia, money doesn't change hands in brown envelopes. I'm sure you're right about that, but money does change hands. You know, the three reasons why people betray their country, they betray it for ideological reasons. Well, I don't think there are many people, starting from the prince down, who have an ideological kinship to China. Then people do it for sex. Well, I don't think that's the issue here. And then people do it for money. Well, that may be the issue. We don't know what was in it for Prince Andrew. And that is what we need to be told. That's much more important as to whether or not he has Norfolk turkey for his Christmas dinner with the rest.
Absolutely. Professor Anthony Gleeson, great to talk to you. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us, a security and intelligence expert. Really interesting to talk to him. Tom Slater's still with me, editor of Spiked Online. Just to let you know that we will bring you these the sentencing verdict from the judge in the case of the Sara Sharif murder by her her stepmother, her father, and her uncle. The judge has said that this is an unbelievable degree of cruelty that was actually involved in this case, and that the trauma for Sara had been hard to contemplate. As soon as we get to the actual sentences he hands down, I promise we'll bring them to you here first, and I would like to get your reaction to them as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Tom Slater, coming back to China. It's a very important question. Anthony Gleeson pointed out, we need to know, what did Prince Andrew get out of this? I mean, it may well be, let's be honest, it may well be that this guy, this Chinese spy, alleged spy, Yang Tengbo, was just a fantastic raconteur. I don't know, made a great lasagna and was just great. No, maybe it was just great company. I don't know. But obviously, people are hanging around with these people. What are you getting out of it? Well, obviously, it's a financial benefit to you of some kind. We know what floats Prince Andrew's boat. We've seen it all. We know he likes hanging around with very rich people who who pay for a lot of his lifestyle. I mean, what did he get out there? Do you think there's any chance we will actually learn?
We could more could come out as this is actually properly looked into now. I mean, what is striking as well is not just the credulity of Prince Andrew himself, but also his senior aides who were, as we've seen reported, sending messages to Tengbo himself saying things like, you are part of really the inner circle. You can act essentially as his representative at various meetings when you're discussing pitch to palace in China. This didn't raise eyebrows is remarkable, and I suppose also you can't count out the context that because he had become such a pariah post-Epstein, that he was more easy to get at, but then you would think again that the people around him would be more on their guard, I suppose.
But that's the thing, I find it extraordinary that there wouldn't have been a warning unless, MI5 were going, well, look, let's just watch this guy and see what he can do. But again, I do think that these things are much more subtle than most people think they are. There are lots of great spy thrillers on telly or on Netflix, and it looks like it's much more obvious, that it should be obvious to see, people are like, ha, 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 I'm a spy. No, they don't do that. It's just subtle influence. But the influence is definitely being exerted, because we can see this even in the fact that the local council in the City of London had turned down the request for a planning permission for this massive new super embassy for the Chinese. Yeah, there's a big super embassy for the Americans. Yeah, they're a big international ally of ours on the south bank of this country. It's a huge big one. It had a lovely tour from the last ambassador. Very, very lovely. But the Chinese, different kettle of fish. It's in the heart of the City of London, near Tower Bridge, or the Tower of London. That got turned down after a phone call with Xi Jinping. Keir Starmer calls it in. The phrase calls it in. Basically, the government is going to make the decision on whether or not this embassy goes ahead. There you are. There's your power.
No, absolutely, and it's something which is always a lot more subtle. Some of this is, I suppose, a sort of inevitable product of wanting to do business with China and vice versa. But it's clear there has to be certain lines which aren't crossed. It's clear that you can't be in a situation in which a particular institution or a particular individual in a position of power is or seen to be compromised. It's just can't be allowed to happen. But it does seem to have been able to happen in this situation. It's just unfortunate that the foil is sort of Prince Andrew, who most people was probably even more suggestible than your average figure in public
but again,
life.
I think people often think of him as just sort of, you say, the useful idiot. He's just a sort of the bumbling sort of silly posh boy who, No, I think he's more than that. I think he's available to the highest bidder. And that is very, very dangerous when you are the king's brother, you are the queen's son. I'm sorry, I think that's a very, very big issue. If you're inviting people into Buckingham Palace, and they're able to get to meet people at the heart of government as well. Anyway, look, just before we go to a break, let me just reiterate, we are hearing this sentencing comments from the judge in the case of the horrific murder of Sara Sharif. Mr. Justice Kavanagh has been given reasons for the sentences that he's about to pass. He has said that the three involved, her father Irfan Sharif, stepmother Bainesh Padul, and uncle Faisal Malik. He's charged not with murder but allowing the murder of a child, the death of a child. He has said that they showed no shred of remorse and that the trauma had been hard to contemplate. He said that there had been an unbelievable degree of cruelty inflicted on Sara in her short life. He said Sara's death was a culmination of years of neglect, frequent assaults, and what could only be described as torture. He said judges had to be careful using the phrase torture, but it was accurate to describe their campaign of abuse as torture. Absolutely harrowing. I'd love to hear your reaction when we do, as we expect in the next couple of moments, get that sentencing, because I'm really not sure that these people should ever be walking out of prison in any way unless they are in a coffin-shaped box. 12:22 is the time. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
About this, people want to know what's her emotional state, how's she feeling, what she's saying. I stay clear of that. I don't want to discuss that, because what I want to focus on is the evidence. If this is a miscarriage of justice, it's going to probably be the biggest miscarriage of justice we've had in criminal justice history in this country. And I need to focus on that, and it's a lot of hard work. So I don't sort of get, and as people want me to, they want me to go down and talk about her. I'm not going to do that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. We are still awaiting the sentence being handed down by the judge in the Sara Sharif case. The unbelievable degree of cruelty that the judge has talked about already before he's actually handed down the sentences for her two murderers and the uncle who allowed her death to happen under his watch, effectively. Also, we've just had an announcement about what's been happening at Leeds Magistrate Court. This involves the paedophile Jack Davies. Now, he was linked with the case involving the disgraced BBC presenter Hugh Edwards. Of course, he was actually found guilty and pleaded guilty, I think, in the end, to these images, indecent images of children, some as young as 7 years old, horrific, even Category A abuse pictures of children. He'd been sent by a paedophile, Alex Williams. Another man involved in that who'd also been sharing these WhatsApp images, Jack Davies, he has also, just like Hugh Edwards, been spared jail because his defence team argued that even though he had, he was possession of 36 Category A images. This is the worst stuff that your imagination won't even let you imagine because you're a normal human being and you don't want to have to think this stuff. 30 Category B and 18 Category C images. These are all horrific images. Some of these images featured babies and boys aged as young as 3. OK? This guy, loads of pictures on his WhatsApp, sharing them with other people. He has not gone to jail. Why? Because the defence team said he should get a sentence in parity with what Hugh Edwards got. And, of course, what Hugh Edwards got was no jail time, extraordinarily. So, yeah. So here we go, Tom. Tom Slater. I mean, here we go. So you can be sent and share images of babies and toddlers being sexually abused and raped, and you don't serve jail because Hugh Edwards didn't, and he's on the telly, so that's okay. Oh, my God.
I don't think anyone could look at this and will struggle to even understand how this sort of precedent has been set. I mean, it was also
most people who share images don't end up going to jail. That's what's so extraordinary.
No, exactly. I mean, in a way, I think the Hugh Edwards thing has been eye-opening for many people insofar as you can possess these images of child rape, which is what we're talking about here. On a huge scale.
People think child porn. It's not porn. Porn is something that people consent to.
And yet, people still not go to jail. And I think that's one of the things that people were very surprised to learn with the Hugh Edwards case, and to see it happen again in this instance will only kind of reinforce the sense of what's going on here.
It just breaks my soul. Here's the thing. I don't understand. I just don't understand why judges agree with it. Apart from the fact that, well, you know, our prisons are full. We've got nowhere to put any of these people. So let's not put away people who haven't actually physically done something. Oh, but you write a tweet about the Southport attack, you do go to jail. Even when you're not actually encouraging people, you're just writing nasty things. So we wouldn't write these things ourselves. I don't agree with a lot of the things that people wrote. People pleaded guilty because they were basically told you're going to be on remand for 10 months anyway. You may as well just plead guilty. But people literally being sentenced to prison when they've not even got a record, and yet someone has got images of children being sexually abused, which they are getting sexual gratification from. And every time those children, someone views those images or shares those images, you are repeating the abuse of that child. You are absolutely... I mean, those children for the rest of their lives are going to know that people are getting their rocks off looking at them being abused as children.
And when it isn't effectively...
I can't even get my head around it.
And when it isn't effectively clamped down upon, you are essentially allowing the market for these images, if you like, to continue unabated. I mean, it's something that, regrettably, we're never going to properly quash in the internet age, but you do as much as humanly possible.
You get caught with this stuff. There are loads of people caught with this stuff. I mean, basically, they don't even prosecute people normally if they haven't got a certain number of images. I want every single person with this stuff. You have one images. I want you to be terrified out of your life. And this is one of the key things with the internet is a danger, which is that people who were into this stuff used to have to, be very, very brave to actually get hold of, horrific magazines, sold, on the back streets. Now people are just seeing this stuff. They can get it on the phone. They can get it on the dark web. Frankly, an awful lot of the stuff that is available on freely and openly on the internet is very, very close to this stuff anyway. And it's being normalised. And then they want to see something a little bit more extreme. We see this with even the legal genuine pornography, again, you know, the slapping, the tying up, the stuff that people are seeing online is so much more extreme than it would have been even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I just think we are into an age of utter depravity, and where people are getting moved into this stuff. I simply can't get over why anyone looking at this stuff isn't instantly sent to jail. Instantly. I mean, someone sends it to you, you literally go, oh my God, what have you sent to me? You're disgusting. You report that person that moment. Otherwise, I want you behind bars.
And it's also a contrast thing, isn't it? When you talk about the other cases that we have been discussing in recent months, again, about someone not doing something in the real world, but saying something, possessing certain material, being a member of a WhatsApp group in which disgusting comments are made, that should require jail, but this... that will strike anyone as bizarre.
Here's my thing. If you don't think that people looking at images of babies being raped should go to jail, I want to see your hard drive. It's as simple. I'm sorry. What right-thinking person? Look, we're waiting for the final actual sentencing. We've got the sentencing remarks of the judge, Mr. Justice John Kavanagh, in the case of Sara Sharif. You know, talking about, you know, her being tortured, years of neglect, frequent assaults, treated as a skivvy from a young age, treated as if she was worthless, unbelievable degree of cruelty, he said. I mean, no shred of remorse from the father and the stepmother. You know, if we have got to start handing down the sort of sentences which are worthy of the horrific treatment that children are getting, and we need to not have a question over our two-tier justice system anymore. We've got to be. I think we've got to be pretty much all on the same page about where people should be sentenced. And again, whether we say like, okay, so private WhatsApp messages which don't actually contain any actual hurt of any actual, you know, someone actually being physically hurt, like rape of a child, then I don't, you know, someone telling a racist joke, I can then choose to not want to be friends with that person, to work with that person. I think in the case of someone being a police officer, as you mentioned earlier, in this case, when Nigel Farage's Milkshake attacker doesn't go to jail, but this guy, same guy, thought that someone a police officer who'd written private WhatsApp messages in a private WhatsApp group, which was a lads group, you know, there were racist jokes in there, that racist comments, that they should go to jail. I think they should certainly lose their jobs. I don't think you could be a police officer and be judging people based on their ethnicity. Sorry, that's not going to fly. But whether you should go to jail, completely different matter. I think people should be entitled to hold unpleasant and horrible views that I disagree with vehemently and be allowed to share them privately, as long as they are not actively abusing or threatening abuse of somebody else.
And I think a lot of members of the public are increasingly suspicious of the nature in which the justice system operates. On the sense that it's been captured by ideology, so you punish certain forms of speech and not others, certain perpetrators are treated differently on the basis of their politics and so on. And then there's also that question of the way in which it's been hollowed out by this really kind of technocratic approach, which is to say, well, we can't put this person behind bars for X amount of time because we do not have the room. That's obviously a reality which has been delivered by successive governments, but you can have a situation in which the proportion of the punishment is determined by how many places you have in prison. That's absurd. And yet we've allowed it to develop. So those two things in parallel are making people really ask questions about whether or not this whole system is even fit for purpose.
I mean, the answer is no. I mean, we should be asking that today, shouldn't we? No, it's not. We're still waiting for this sentencing. As soon as that's handed down, we'll bring it to you. Up next, we are going to be talking about possibility of stealth taxes and people not being able to vote in council elections next May, as expected, due to a big rearrangement of councils. We'll talk also about the Sarson heads pubs landlords banding together to defend themselves against a man who says, as a convicted man sharing terrorist ideology, that he's offended by the Saracens head pub. You can't make this story up. Honestly, you really couldn't. This is Talk. We are the home of common sense.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Thank you for joining us. As I said, as soon as we do get the actual sentences handed down, in the case of the little 10-year-old Sara Sharif's father, stepmother and uncle, in the case of her death, torture, the judge has actually said in the case, we will bring those to you live. First, love to get your reaction to that sentencing when we do get it. Still joined also by Tom Slater from Spiked Online. And let's talk right now about where Labour are, an impossibility of stealth taxes for millions of voters who are then going to be denied a chance to vote in local elections next year. Let's talk to Richard Power Said. He's a former Labour Party official. He's also author of the book 1997, The Future That Never Happened, A History of New Labour. A very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. Now, it's quite interesting that this is a big headline in the Mail today talking about Labour set to enable stealth tax hikes for millions of voters, denying them a vote in next year's council elections. This is all part of Angela Rayner's devolution revolution, yesterday announced creating more directly elected mayors, or basically having powers to impose what they call a mayoral precept on top of council tax for large parts of England, but also a lot of strategic authorities covering areas replacing two-tiered councils mean that we might need authorities to delay elections currently online for early May next year. Is this just sort of making a mountain out of a molehill, so getting 2 + 2 and having it equal 57, or have they got a fair case here?
I mean, it's not particularly surprising, but Angela Rayner comes up with a really good and popular policy, and then the Daily Mail dumps on it with absolute nonsense, is it?
Is it a popular policy? Do people feel strongly about this?
I think most people want devolution. Not everybody, I accept that. Most people, and you know what? It's a quite a kind of joint Tory Labour thing, right? You know, a lot of this came from George Osborne, probably the one good thing he did. So we want devolution. And obviously, we want our mayors, our local representatives, to have some power. So most people agree it's a good thing that mayors have some control over taxes. That has been the case for a very long time.
I'm wondering whether people do think that, given that most people don't even bother voting in local mayoral elections. I mean, where we have directly elected mayors, I mean, most people don't even bother voting.
Okay, well, look, that's an interesting question, but the thing that Rayner is being accused of, absolute nonsense, is a stealth tax and not giving people control over this. What's gone on, right, is she said, we're going to give local representatives the choice about whether they want to create a mayoralty in their area. If we didn't allow those new mayors to have the powers that the existing mayors had, then, I mean, people would be...
Okay, fair enough. But the main issue we've got, of course, is local councils with any sort of local taxes. Of course, actually, the amount of funding from central government to local councils has plummeted, I think, by more than 60%. And, of course, we've got all these extra costs of national insurance rises for employers and minimum wage and things like that, which have bumped up costs for local councils. But they haven't got extra money, which is why we see council taxes going up. But it is different in different areas, isn't it? And often, you know, some quite poor areas don't put it up, some richer areas do. Often it does depend on the political makeup of the council and how well it's run.
Well, I mean, you could say that that's local democracy in action. I'm not saying...
But hold on a minute. On one level it is, but there's also an element where people don't go, oh, my local council tax has gone up by X amount, I'm going to move to a different borough. People don't just move, so they don't get a say if their local council doesn't do a good job.
Well, no, they do, because they can vote for them.
I live in Camden Council. It doesn't matter how I vote, I'm going to end up with another Labour council that doesn't empty my bins.
Oh, well, I'm glad to know that you've got such fine local representative despite your best efforts, Julia. I mean,
it doesn't matter who I vote for, they're not going to empty my bins often enough.
Well, indeed, and that's because George Osborne stole all of their money, and that's why you've got potholes, and that's why you've got local libraries shutting down. I mean, one of the preposterous things about what Rayner is being criticised for in this Daily Mail article is the idea that, apparently, if you have a new mayoralty coming, you shouldn't delay your local elections. You should just have an election this coming year, and then immediately you're going to have a new election because you've got a new mayor coming in. I mean, it would be a proper kind of Brenda from Bristol moment. Everyone would be,
not another one.
Exactly. I mean, this is Angela Rayner is somebody who divides people because she speaks it like it is, and she's got great policies. And funnily enough, the Daily Mail doesn't like it.
No, well, I'm in favour of the house building. I know a lot of my audience aren't. I mean, again, I think we could build nicer houses, and I think there's a way of getting these houses through. And actually, when people actually do, where they do want them and how they do want them. But again, we need the infrastructure as well. I still doubt that that's going to be done. I don't think they're going to achieve those housing targets. I just don't know anyone who thinks, you know what my top priority is for this government, given all the things that are going wrong with this country. You know what I think we need to do? I think we need to change the way we have district councils. I just don't think there's anyone that this is even in the top 4,000 million of their priorities that need to be done in this country. You say it's a popular policy. It's not.
I think that you are totally right that most people don't consider bureaucratic reorganisations to be the most exciting kind of thing that a politician can do. I think there's a difference between that and it not having an impact on people's lives. We generally accept in this country that the way the state is organised isn't particularly effective. It results in policy errors. And you know what? More local decisions being made locally, I think, is probably quite a good way of avoiding that.
Yeah, when we have local decisions made locally, we often end up with the situation we go, we've got a postcode lottery, and then people complain, and then it goes back to the centre and it comes back down again. I mean, if local people don't like the local decisions, they actually often, in most cases, don't have a choice about changing the local council, as I said, in my local area.
OK, but I mean, no individual has the power to change the council, but we do collectively. That's how representatives...
Yes, I know, and I understand that, but I'm just saying that people don't... You say local power, but to a certain extent, in most areas, again, you put a red rosette on a councillor, they're going to get elected in their local council. You put a blue rosette, they're going to get elected, in which case people don't feel they do get that sort of change. Let me ask you about something else there, because Kemi Badenoch has indicated, we're told, I'm always worried about indicating, she said that the idea that a simpler, flatter tax system was very attractive. And she said a future Tory government would first cut government spending dramatically before they would ever think about making a single rate tax system affordable. Now, a number of countries, Eastern European countries, have having a flat rate taxes. Hungary, Romania and Estonia, where basically there's not been a very strong history of collecting taxes post-communism. Do you think a flat tax has any appeal? I mean, we've got VAT, that's effectively a flat tax, but when it comes to income tax and corporation tax, we largely do it on the basis of how much money people have got.
Well, hiking taxes for the poor and cutting taxes for the rich is exactly what you'd expect from Kemi Badenoch. Luckily, she's never going to become Prime Minister. But it's absolutely...
Very confident of that.
I feel very confident that everyone in Tory HQ saw this and went, oh, not another one. I mean, it's so bad. It's such bad politics, right? Kemi Badenoch, she's got one job. She's got to keep together the Tory party's electoral coalition and bring back in those reform voters who are more motivated by cultural conservatism and who either hold their nose at or ignore the fact that Nigel Farage is an economic libertarian who doesn't care about working class people and only cares about cutting taxes for the rich. Now,
well, there's a lot of people argue that cutting taxes for rich also actually helps jobs, which helps working class people.
I mean, that's not what you see in most countries where they cut taxes for the rich, right? It increases GDP sometimes, not always, sometimes it increases GDP. But the money that GDP represents goes to the wealthy and to the shareholders, and it doesn't go to working class people who are actually making the
I
value
think
of the
most
economy.
people in this country would like lower taxes for everybody, but there we are. We'll have to leave it there. Time is against us. Richard Power Said, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just want to come back to this district council issue with Tom Slater from Spiked, because I mean these sort of reorganisations, even things like like Lords reform and things like that. I know things need to be done. There are probably you shouldn't be paying for two sets of councils.
Yeah.
That's crazy. But fundamentally, these are not the issues that most people are concerned with, are they?
No, absolutely not. And whenever you see a government talking about this, generally speaking, it's because there is a kind of ulterior motive. In this case, it's because they want to get through this building programme. They're worried about local opposition. And also, like many governments, they get quite attracted to various different new forms of devolution settlements because of the fact that it kind of passes the buck. You can present that as we're devolving decision-making down and people can be locally accountable. It also means that you can distance yourself from decisions which are made locally and not have to take the flak when it goes wrong. And I think that's probably a combination of the two.
Nearly always, yes. There's, as you say, an ulterior motive. We are still waiting for the actual sentences to be handed down. I think the judge has been, Mr Justice Kavanagh, in the case of Sara Sharif's father, stepmother and uncle, has been speaking for, I think, an hour, outlining the case and talking about the lack of remorse and the culmination of years of neglect, frequent assaults and torture of Sara during her 10 years short life. And he says he does want the scale of Sara's ordeal out in the open. It's important that we do know what's going on. I still fear that lessons are not going to be learned. I don't think lessons are often even learned, even with the sentencing. As soon as we get that verdict of the actual sentences handed down, obviously guilty verdicts last week, we'll bring that to you first. The time right now is 12:48. This is Talk.
What you've got here is, and what's even worse, he helped found his Picture Palace organisation, which reportedly any income that generated, Prince Andrew is supposed to have been able to charge 2% commission.
Yes.
So what you've got here is he needs to then be absolutely clear what this man has done and been involved with. And if he founded it and has helped Prince Andrew make money, then it's even worse, look.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with me as well, joined now by Rafe Heidel-Manki, who's a historian and senior fellow at the New Culture Forum, to discuss the utterly mad story involving the Sarson Heads pubs. I say there's more than one Saracen's Head because it's actually a whole load of those pubs around the country. In fact, it's one of the most popular names for pubs, been in place, a lot of them, for over 500 years. But bosses of various different pubs and their punters, their staff and others have all said they're going to rally around a landlord who's being taken to court by a, wait for it, convicted terrorist because he says he's deeply offended by the name and, of course, the sign showing a Turk or an Arab's head as a Saracen's head on the side of this sign, this Saracen's Head in Cheshire, in Buckinghamshire. The man complaining about this is called Khalid Bakr. He was jailed for 4 years for preparing jihadi propaganda, but apparently his sensitivities have grown since that time, and he's upset about seeing, he says, the depiction of a bearded Arab or Turk on the pub sign. He says it's racist and the depiction incites violence. He wants compensation of £1,850 from the landlord and wants to take on more than 30 other pubs with the same name if successful. Let's talk about this with Rafe. Rafe, it is absolutely extraordinary that this man claims this is such an awful pub sign. He's offended by it. He wants compensation. But, I mean, this is just a man on the make, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't make this up, you know. I mean, forget the Saracen's Head. He should be offended by, you know, Islamist beheadings by his jihadist colleagues.
And the propaganda that he was pushing, for which he was sent to prison.
Yeah, precisely. And I'm so pleased to hear that the pubs are rallying round.
Yes.
You know, personally, I think the image of the Saracen's Head looks like a very noble depiction. You know, there's nothing I would say.
It's a very fine-looking, very noble-looking man. I mean, you know, what's not to like?
We just have to hope that, you know, the courts take the similar view to the pubs here, because if the courts do end up supporting this cretin, then, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it's game over for Britain. Because, you know, a civilization that won't defend its culture, its heritage, its institutions simply will cease to exist.
Yeah, well, I don't have any trust in our courts. We saw, you know, the case with Nigel Farage and the milkshaking and all these various different cases. We just had a case today where a man with loads of images of babies being raped doesn't even go to prison. I think our courts are absolutely not fit for purpose anymore, neither are our judges. So who knows what happens. But the key thing of this is people fighting these cases, because often people are told, it's the same when you get some very dodgy employment tribunal cases where people are just on the make and they're claiming, you know, sexism or racism. It's just totally and utterly, or transphobia, utterly made up, is actually, you know, people are told, well, yeah, you can fight it, but by the time you've paid for the lawyers, by the time you've paid for this and that at the time, you're better off just paying the 1,800 quid the guy's asking for and walking away. But we need people to stand up to this stuff to stop it happening. And for these people, I think that this man should be prosecuted himself for wasting court time.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, Green King, unfortunately, has a track record of caving in on
this
these
is the pub chain.
So, yeah, this is the pub chain who owned the Saracen's Head.
Yeah.
They've renamed various other pubs, you know, dealing in the response to Black Lives Matter and so forth. One woman complained about the use of the term midget for one pub, even though that was actually named after the car, the midget, rather than a little person. And they've taken the knee. They must stand their ground here. I mean, firstly, they don't have to fear a boycott because Islamists don't tend to go to pubs.
Yes, exactly. Oh, well, that thing is fascinating, how many people are saying, like, you know, they'll support them. I mean, look, I'll help crowdfund for you guys. I've got 500,000 followers on X. I'm happy to help crowdfund you, to support you. But we do need to stand firm on these things. And again, this rewriting, it's the same with the statue toppling and, you know, just rewriting our entire nation's past.
The problem is, you know, we have a culture of fear that, you know, envelops most aspects of our lives today.
Yeah.
You know, it's businesses, it's our cultural institutions, the police and the academia. It's fear of causing offence to Islam, fear of being called racist, the worst thing you could possibly be called, fear of being targeted by extremists. Just remember that poor teacher in Batley who's still in hiding almost 4 years after showing an image of Muhammad in class, or the Wakefield boy who got death threats after scuffing a copy of the...
So people think this is a silly, funny little story. It's not. It's actually incredibly sinister, isn't it?
we need to regain, really, a sense of self-confidence in our culture, in our heritage and our identity, both being British and the West, the genius and exceptionalism of the West, because we have a heritage that should be robustly celebrated and robustly defended, and we have to stop treating Muslims, black people and other ethnic minorities as if they're China dolls and have to be protected in cotton wool all the time.
It's its own kind of racism, actually, isn't it?
It is, precisely. No one has the right not to be offended. You know, we're always defended, aren't we, with some of the stories we're covering, but we just live with it. We don't take people to...
Exactly. It is extraordinary. Really talking sense, as always, there. Rafe Hadel-Mankiw, thank you very much indeed. Again, Tom Slater, you'd think this is obviously a silly case involving a pub name, but actually, again, it's insidious. It's this just... We have effectively a blasphemy law, don't we? I mean, is the protection of Islam law in this country by default anyway. This man's claiming this, but the idea that somebody who's gone to prison for basically pushing jihadist propaganda, who's saying, oh, I'm really offended by a picture of a handsome man on a pub sign, is ludicrous.
I know, it's absolutely ludicrous, which is why it's so important that this case really gets chucked out and rebuffed, because of the fact that he's quite clearly just spied an opportunity, dare I say it, to recoup some funds for whatever reason. Maybe, just maybe, this convicted jihadist doesn't have quite the delicate sensibilities that he's claiming to actually have. And that he recognises that, you know, this might be a cartoonish example, but our culture does leave the door open to people to take the mick.
It really does. People just simply go, no, shush. No, shush is not used often enough, I would absolutely say. It's really interesting. We were still waiting for the judge in this case, the Sara Sharif case, to hand down his sentences on the stepmother, the father and the uncle for her death. His words have been quite extraordinary. He talked about grim satisfaction from violence, a culmination of years of neglect, frequent assaults. Talked about is no exaggeration. She was